Uber Flight 101, please respond. This is Uber Flight 101. Go ahead. Captain, we hope you and your travelers are doing well. This is flight control regarding your scheduled pickup and delivery of your current passengers. Your route takes you directly into an oncoming storm system, but we just wanted to keep you aware, and please feel free to provide ongoing updates of your passage. Yeah, I see it, Control. Clouds look black, but it's nothing that we haven't dealt with before. Are you suggesting we land? That's a negative. We just want to keep our lines open to you in the event of an emergency. Copy that, Control. I'll keep you updated until we're through the storm. It's definitely a big one. Control! Control, come in! Flight Control, please respond. This is Flight Control. Go ahead. Control, this is Uber Flight 101. Are there any other aircraft scheduled to be in our vicinity? 101, come back with that last request. You're breaking up. There's an aircraft in the storm. Please make contact and let them know we're approaching and to keep their distance. The storm is making it difficult to maintain trajectory. If they're not careful, we risk a collision. Captain, there shouldn't be an aircraft near you. You're the only flight scheduled through the area this evening. Control, you need to take another look at your readings. This thing is huge. We're coming up on it fast. There's no way you're missing it on your radar. It may be unscheduled, but it's definitely up there. Please, try to reach them. They need to give us a wide berth. I've got kids on board this thing. Flight 101, respond now. Yes. Yes, Control. Go ahead. Captain, describe what you are seeing. What the hell do you mean, describe it? We need you to remain calm. We are designating your interaction as an unidentified flying object scenario. We're doing all we can to contact the aircraft you are approaching. We just need some more information to learn of its origin and if it's a rogue pilot. You can handle it, Captain. You're trained for this. I know the storm is an added stressor, but please, in detail, we need you to describe the UFO. I can't believe this. You don't know what it is, do you? Describe it. It's big. I didn't realize how big it is. We're getting closer. Christ! I don't know what this thing is. I'm trying to turn, but the storm is disrupting our instruments. If I go manual, I could risk losing control entirely, and the truth is, I'm losing my nerve. Help us, please. We're doing all we can. We need you to remain calm and describe what you are seeing. Do it now. It's not right, Control. This thing, I don't think it's a ship. Captain, come back with that. It's not a ship? No. No, it's not. I think it's alive. Flight 101, you are not making any sense. We need you to remain command and give us more information. You're gonna make it through this. Hello? Captain? It's black. Made of skin? This thing, it's coming out of the storm. It has arms. God, they're not arms. They're tentacles. I can't. Jesus, it has eyes. They're red. Full. No. Empty. Black. Please. Control. Get us out of here. We're doing everything we can. Just keep talking, Captain. Keep talking to me. It's like it's coming out of something. A window or a portal of some kind. It's surfacing from a deep hole in the sky. Fuck. God, I sound insane. It's dripping wet. Covered in water. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. Control, I know this sounds crazy, but there's water. Oceans. Vast oceans on the other side of the hole. I mean the tear. The tear in the sky that it's coming out of. Wait. What's that? What's happening? Captain, are you still with me? I can hear it now. It's speaking to me. Its voice, it's beautiful. God damn it, man, what's it saying? What has lived will wither, and what has slept will ascend. Loathsomeness waits and dreams in the deep, and decay will spread over the fallible cities of man. The old ones are coming. They will teach us new ways to shout and rend and revel in our folly. All the Earth will be aflame with an inferno of ecstasy and chaos. Stop! Stop this now! Calm down and shut up! The thing cannot be described. There is no language for such abyssal shrieking and ancient lunacies. When the stars are aligned, it can plunge from world to world through the sky, but when the stars are wrong, it cannot live. It is a contradiction of all matter, force, and cosmic order, a mountain that has emerged into our tiny world. For the love of God, please help us! Hello? Captain? Captain, respond. Somebody answer me, please.
We have waited, dreaming. What was submerged will rise. Madness comes.
Dormus here. Subscribe for more horror stories.
This is Jack Byers of Hugo Spacecraft 59X2. I'm requesting that this ship be shot down before entry into Earth's stratosphere. Poseidon has been compromised by unidentified extraterrestrials and we have lost command of the spacecraft. If you receive this message, do not allow the spacecraft to make it to Earth. I repeat, do not allow this spacecraft to enter Earth. They're coming. Out there. They're coming for everyone.
Ryan was the first to hear the message. His heart skipped as he listened to each word. They thought they had lost Hugo 59X2 in space, but this new message changed everything. Who is coming? He wondered. That was obviously Jack's voice. He had worked with Jack for years, and he would recognize his voice anywhere. If this message was just coming in, that means it had been sent several days or weeks ago. Hugo 59X2 had been confirmed lost in space for weeks, but this message changed everything. What was Jack talking about? He sounded terrified over the radio message. Extraterrestrials, Ryan wondered. Was this some sort of joke? Obviously not. Jack was always too focused and disciplined with his work to mess around with such important stuff. This was real. Ryan was perplexed as he replayed the message over and over. At least, this meant that the spacecraft wasn't actually lost, but hijacked. Ryan just couldn't make much sense out of the strange message. He was still pondering the nature of the short message when a blip appeared on the radar. He looked closer into the satellite feed. It was Hugo 59X2. "Oh my God," he exclaimed as he jumped to his feet. "This is fucking madness." He had to tell the rest. This is Jack of the Hugo Spacecraft 59X2, reporting to the Mission Space Command Center. Can anyone hear me? That was the upteenth time I had tried to contact the Mission Space Tower back on Earth to brief them about the sudden twist of events, but I received no reply once again. A few weeks ago, Poseidon had intercepted a strange signal and attempted to decipher it. That was our mistake. We should have shut him down immediately, but we did not. His program was soon corrupted, and he began to receive commands from another dictator. This was supposed to be an easy mission to the space station on Mars, but everything had changed. We had lost communication with the command center on Earth, and Poseidon was now in full command of the ship. Poseidon had changed our coordinates, jammed our signals, and was now heading towards an unknown destination. Something was luring him further into the dark space, but the question in everyone's heart was, are we going to die? We had been flying through space for about 2 months, according to Earth time, when we came in contact with a dark, sinister object hovering somewhere in space.
Sir,
I think you need to see this. Mark's voice sounded from the speakers. Mark was also an astronaut on the ship, and the sound of his voice told me something wasn't right. I stared at the massive, sinister object which hovered in front of us when Poseidon had brought our ship to a sudden halt in front of it. Whatever had been controlling Poseidon was now right in front of us. The otherworldly object was stealth black. No one had uttered a word since we stopped. Everyone's jaws had dropped as we stared in shock at the stark object which hovered before us, mocking our ship with its grandiose appearance. Poseidon's synthetic voice broke the silence.
Commencing sequence,
Poseidon said.
What sequence?
Mark barked back. We all didn't know what to expect. We were gripped by fear and suspense. We begged for words, but we found none. We had exhausted all our options as we clinged tightly to hope. Poseidon! Override sequence now!
voice recognition confirmed. Thank you, Jack.
Poseidon replied. Voice what? Oh, crap! I let out in frustration.
Hugo hatch door unlocking sequence initiated.
Poseidon continued. Pandemonium immediately broke out amongst us as everyone searched for a way to shut down Poseidon. He seemed to have shut us off all the control systems and access points where he could be shut down. We had just been beaten by our very own creation. What could possibly be lurking beyond the walls of this massive, sinister object, I thought. Whatever was inside the dark, disc-like structure obviously had more advanced technology to have successfully hacked into Poseidon's program. Poseidon was one of the best artificial intelligence supercomputers back on Earth, but he had been hacked in seconds.
Unlocking Hugo hatch door in 5, 4, 3.
Everyone suddenly stopped what they were doing as we all turned toward the hatch door, bracing ourselves for anything. All our efforts to shut down Poseidon had been futile, and we now held tightly to hope.
2, 1.
Poseidon went silent, and his robotic voice was replaced by the sound of the spacecraft's door. We all put on our oxygen masks. Even oxygen didn't seem like much of a luxury to us at that moment. Everyone held their breaths in expectation of what was to come. We waited for a while, but nothing happened. Our gazes remained fixed towards the vast space beyond the door, searching for anything that moved in the darkness. A loud screech suddenly resounded from the sinister object as I shifted my gaze towards the spaceship in front of us. Mark had refused to take his eyes off the door. The sound was like a strange wave of signals traveling through space. Something began to move in a compartment of the object as an ominous noise erupted all around it, like some sort of door. We all continued to stare curiously at the strange turn of events as our hearts pounded audibly. Something was coming out from the object. We were all gripped by shock to utter words. All we could do was watch as the events unfolded. We had been staring for minutes, but we all saw nothing. Poseidon soon broke the silence.
Lockdown sequence activated. Welcome aboard, sir.
Somehow, his robotic voice haunted all of us. Welcome aboard. But we had not seen anything. We were creeped out when the doors began to close.
New coordinates received.
Poseidon continued.
Destination, Earth.
We were just astronauts on a space mission to Mars. We never signed up for any of this. Mark was already trembling underneath his spacesuit. Who wouldn't? Our spacecraft soon began to retreat back towards the route we had just come from. What just happened? Mark let out in confusion. Everything seemed normal. We expected some sort of alien invasion, but nothing had happened, or so we thought. Something still seemed off about the encounter. I was convinced that something had happened and we were simply missing out on a big chunk of the puzzle. Poseidon had been translating a weird frequency ever since we retreated from the large space object. Something was already giving him orders, and I was bent on finding out. I grabbed my tablet and walked calmly into a hidden corner on the ship as I attempted to hack one last time into Poseidon's programming to at least decipher the frequency. After several failed attempts, I finally succeeded in gaining access into Poseidon's language catalog, and I quickly deciphered the frequency. I synced the frequency into Poseidon's translation update, which he had earlier received from whatever had taken command of his program, and searched for the English translation. Something was transmitting from our ship to another frequency. Probably the other object. I guessed it was a spaceship of some sort. I listened to Poseidon's translation module. There were several distorted translations which Poseidon didn't really get right, but in the chaotic attempt to translate an alien language, a few key words which were perfectly translated was enough to help me understand the message. Infiltrate ship. Hosts ready to control. Take over planet. Invade. The translation was messed up, but it was clear enough. Domination of the Earth. The question which now plagued my mind was, who infiltrated our ship? We had not noticed any signs of. Unless I initiated a quick scan of our ship, using Poseidon's radio frequency wave detector.
Alert. Malware detected. Attempted language hack detected. Logging off unauthorized access.
Poseidon had detected the hack, but I had already seen what I needed to. I grabbed my radio and sent a quick message recording to the Space Mission Control Tower back on Earth. That's why they couldn't attack us directly. Of course, I mused. They needed hosts to survive on Earth, and we were the unlucky bunch of astronauts who fell right into their perfect plan. Dark entities, vibrating at a very fast frequency. Perhaps that is why we couldn't see them. They looked like the Parasite from the Venom movie, I thought. I felt sad that Poseidon, an artificial supercomputer that I had invested so much into, along with several top scientists to create, had now come back to haunt us. Poseidon soon managed to shut me off from its program, but it was just after I had caught a glimpse of the alien parasite taking over the bodies of the other astronauts as their loud screams echoed throughout the spacecraft. There was obviously nowhere to run to, so I sat in wait, preparing to be taken over by these alien invaders. Ryan played the recording in front of the entire space agency as they listened in confusion. What was going to be their next decision? Were they going to blast off the spacecraft containing one of the most advanced AI supercomputers in the world because of a voice recording? They knew that something was obviously suspicious about the disappearance and sudden reappearance of Hugo 59X2, but an alien hijack. They laughed it off as a mere joke. There are no such things as aliens, many of them said. Ryan was convinced that Jack was telling the truth as he worked tirelessly to attain communication with Hugo 59X2, and he eventually did, but it came off a huge surprise when Jack's voice finally came through the radio, debunking Ryan's claims that the previous message was from him, and giving a detailed explanation of the various challenges they had faced on the trip, which made them to lose radio connection with the Space Mission Control Tower back on Earth, and the reason for their return, blaming it on a slight malfunction of Poseidon's program. Ryan was immediately fired for falsification of information. The space agency allowed Hugo 59X2 back into Earth's atmosphere and greeted the astronauts warmly. They had just welcomed Earth's doom. I awoke from a terrible nightmare. Where? For a moment, I regained consciousness of what had happened. It had been a few days since we touched down on Earth's surface, and I had no memory of it. I attempted to make a quick phone call when a crushing pain invaded my head and threw me off my bed as I groaned loudly in pain with my hands over my ears. In an instant, something took over my entire being and consciousness as I rose up calmly and strolled out of the room. I needed to feed the darkness into as many people as I could before the invasion. Somewhere in the dark corners in the room, Ryan watched in utter shock.
Hi, this is Tuomas, and it is my great pleasure to read this story for you. Subscribe for more. The legends say that every 30 years, it awakens to devour the souls of little children, I continued. The air was soaked in thick silence as the children listened to my scary midnight tale. I could see the terror on their faces as I let out a little chuckle. Melody approached quietly from behind. "God!" She let out a frightening yell as all the children screamed in unison and fled away from the sound of her voice. "Melody!" Sam let out in a frustrated tone as their screams slowly turned into a roar of laughter. I raised my hand to give her a high five as she proceeded to sit in my lap. I was proud of my daughter. She was the most cheerful child ever, and I was just glad as anything to have Melody as my daughter. I was just Bob Gray, the circus misfit, or otherwise known as Pennywise, the dancing clown, as they all called me. I hadn't been the best of fathers, and I didn't have a lot of money, but Melody had become my strength over the years. Intelligent, cheerful, and optimistic at all times. I'd do anything for my little girl. "Dad," Melody asked, "do you think the tales are true?" Well, my father told me these stories when I was a kid, but of course, it was just a story. Couldn't possibly be real. There are no such things as monsters, but I had to keep the suspense alive amongst the kids. "Well, we'll just have to find out," I said with a wide grin. "Come on, kids, get some sleep. We've a busy day ahead of us tomorrow." I tucked them into their beds as I kissed them good night. Somewhere in the darkness of that night, not far away from the nondescript town of Derry, a strange darkness watched in silence, waiting and scheming for the right time to make a move. After 3 decades, it had awoken, and it was thirsty. Our circus acts had attracted a lot of attention in this town. Well, they seemed to love us, and had begged us the previous night to perform one last time before we moved on to the next destination. When we came into Derry, it seemed void of vibrance and life, but our little circus had brightened up many faces in just a few days. They didn't want us to leave, but we had to. Although they were very fun people to be with, they didn't have much to give, and I'm just Bob Gray, ringmaster and father to a bunch of orphans. I had to provide for them all. Dad! Maria is missing!" My eyes snapped open as Melody's words fell upon my ears. It was morning. "What? Did she just say? We searched the entire camp for Maria, but all we found was this." Melody pulled out a small doll and raised it toward my face. My heart instantly skipped a beat and began to race. It was covered in blood. "Where'd you find this, Melody?" "In the woods close by," she replied. Blood was never a good sign. "All right, kids, listen to me. Stay very close to the animals and do not let anyone out of your sight. No one should leave this place." I made my way into the woods where Melody had reportedly found Maria's doll. I breathed heavily as I made my way deeper and deeper. Birds had all gone silent, and the leaves of the trees stood as though they were waiting and watching in silence for something about to happen. All the hairs on my body stood up as I strolled deeper into the woods. I followed the obvious signs, broken branches, leaning leaves, my instincts, and finally, blood. I was still putting on my baggy suit of silver with orange pom-poms and a collar ruff, my favorite circus costume, accompanied by my trademark red hair. At this moment, I no longer resembled my usual self, but Pennywise the dancing clown. Wait a minute. Blood, I mused. There were stains of blood on a tree right in front of me. Fear gripped me as I prepared for the obvious. I'd been a traveler for years, but I'd never been this terrified. I took a double take at the doll, which I held in my hand, and then shifted my gaze towards the tree. I traced the stain of blood, and my gaze followed the trunk of the tree upwards. Right there was Maria, dangling from one of the branches of the tree as trickles of her blood flowed down its trunk. I was terrified and dumbfounded as I stood in a trance. There was an alarming carving on the wood, very close to where Maria hung. I stared at it in dread. I'd seen this carving recently, but I wasn't sure where. The omens were not good, and they just got worse. The bush behind me moved. I jerked in fear. Whoever had done this was still most likely lurking around. I scanned my surroundings carefully. The bush wriggled again, and I retreated slowly. When a large rat made its way out of the thicket, I heaved a heavy sigh. All of a sudden, 1,000 voices invaded my mind as I fell to the ground. A dreadful darkness emerged from within the marking on the tree and approached me, and I felt helpless against it. Were those voices of children, I wondered? It began to morph into a sinister-looking being. When I regained my strength, and with a loud cry, I forced myself to my feet and sped out of the forest. A heavy gust of wind pursued me, but I was damned to stop and look back. I could see the other side, and I darted towards it with all the strength I could muster. And with a dying scream, I sped out of the woods and straight into the circus camp. "Bob, where's Maria?" the children all asked with increasing curiosity, but I ignored them all, strode into my tent and took out a set of books. I was confident that I'd seen that carved marking in one of the novels I'd read to the children recently. I searched through the pile of books until I stumbled on one. Its back cover had been torn out, but I could still see a large letter T spring out from the edge. "It," I whispered. I proceeded to carefully flip through the yellowing pages of the strange-looking book. Spells and incantations. It now looked like something more than harmless children's stories. It took a while, and then I saw it. The same marking that I had earlier seen in the woods was perfectly painted on one of the pages. My eyebrows rose in shock. "Yesterday's bedtime story," I said, almost too calmly. I stormed out of the tent. Whatever evil lurked behind the pages of this book was not just a story. It is real. "We have to get out of here," I mused. "But the circus," Melody argued. "It's not safe out here, Melody. I know the kids have been training and looking forward to the last circus act, but my decision had to stand." "We need to leave," I replied almost instantly, as I immediately instructed them to begin to pack up. I couldn't shake off the strange feeling I had that we were being watched. "What about Maria?" Melody shot back. Melody was smart. She was beginning to suspect that something was not right. Our gazes met, and I crouched in front of her. I knew that she could sense the anxiety all over my face. "Trust me, Melody," I whispered, and placed a soft kiss on her forehead. I led the entire circus troupe quickly out of Derry, as thoughts of Maria's lifeless body hanging from a tree plagued my mind at certain intervals. I grabbed the mysterious book again and dove deeper. I wanted to know everything about it. According to the tales in the book, the creature returned every 3 decades, luring children into the woods, and they were never seen again. The book stated that it had landed on an asteroid several years ago, and had remained in Derry ever since. "Of course, they knew," I whispered. "That's why they wanted us to stay. The inhabitants of Derry were aware of its presence, and we had come just at the right time with its favorite delight, children." We soon approached the outskirts of town when our circus carriage came to a sudden halt, and I watched in confusion as Melody jumped out of the carriage and ran into the nearby woods. "Maria!" she screamed as she ran further and further into the forest. "Melody, no!" I barked as I quickly jumped down from the horse and handed the reins to the second rider. "Ride out, as fast as you can," I said. He was startled as he stared at the stern look on my face. He knew that this was no circus trick. He nodded in understanding and galloped away from my location as I immediately pursued my daughter into the woods. If anything happened to Melody, I would never forgive myself. I darted further into the woods, praying underneath my breath that my dear Melody was still safe. "Melody!" I cried out, but I was answered by the strange yet familiar calmness of the forest. I knew that the creature was here. I realized that I've been chasing shadows for a while now as I stopped to catch my breath. "Please, not my Melody," I whispered. "Are you sure?" An eerie voice responded in my head as I stood in confusion. "Does dear Pennywise want Melody back?" I heard the voice again, and I immediately nodded in agreement.
Pennywise will have to bring it, little children, every day, starting with your little friends.
I understood the offer it had just brought to my table, and I didn't have many options. I thought about all the beautiful faces of the children in my circus. I knew that I would do anything for Melody, but this price was too heavy to bear. Just then, I remembered that I'd seen a certain spell in one of the pages of the book that spoke about sending it back to sleep, and I quickly recited the phrase. That was my mistake. I heard a loud screech as it approached from within a hollow space in front of me with something that would haunt me forever. The lifeless body of Melody was tossed out from within the hollow darkness. It approached me with intent as 1,000 voices exploded through my mind once again. I stared in dread as it descended into my entire being as I began to choke. I continued to stare at Melody's lifeless body on the floor as it possessed my entire being. My world was gone. It had taken my daughter away from me. I had no purpose anymore, and might as well do the same to other parents. That day, Bob Gray died, and Pennywise, the eater of children, was born. I became the darkness.
I became it.
Hi. Let's wait for more people to join the live before we start. You know, sometimes Instagram doesn't notify, and already a couple of you guys have written to my DM saying you didn't know I was on live. Today, I brought you guys something very special. You can't miss it. Only 500 people. Greetings to Mary and her cousin Sebastian. It doesn't look like more are coming in. Hey, remember to tell your friends, spam the chat, do a lot of spam. If you guys want special stuff, you have to share the live streams, so I make them more often. Instagram doesn't pay me for the posts, and the least you can do is help me that way. Well, let's start anyway. Do you remember when I told you that I had a super exciting and super shocking project? Yeah! Good. Here it is. I bought a house. Do you like the effect? I got a soundboard. You have no idea how excited I am. When I started on Instagram a year ago, I never imagined there'd be so many people enjoying my content. Every photo, every dance, I never thought I'd get this far. My own home at 20 years old. This Instagram Live is super special, because not only am I going to show you my new house, but we're going to destroy it! We're already at 900. Guys, thank you very much. Sophia asks, are you really going to destroy the house? LOL. Obviously, no. I'm not that stupid, and Instagram doesn't pay that well either, so just that I want to remodel it, and you're going to be part of the construction process. It's pretty cool, right? I bought a cheap house that was up for auction at the bank. Nobody wanted it because the stupid old people around think it's cursed. I swear, it cost me a pittance, and you guys are going to be part of the restoration process with me. Woohoo! 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 Lord Marley 399 asks, why do they say it's cursed? How scary. Take care of yourself. Very much, I love you. I love you too, Lord Marley. That stuff about it being cursed is nonsense invented by the neighborhood. I think the neighbors didn't want anyone else here, or maybe the same vandals who came into smoke spread the rumor. This wall behind me is white because I cleaned it, so Instagram wouldn't start bothering me. But if you saw the rest of the house, it's completely dirty everywhere, and there is a ridiculous amount of trash in the rooms. If you saw the basement, you would lose your minds. You guys are asking me to tell you the curse story? Let's do something. If you want me to tell it, you have to, right now, get us to 1,000 viewers on Instagram. That's all I ask. You can do it, guys. Show how much you support me this instant. 937, 945, 963. All right. Tell your friends, your neighbors, and even your grandma if you have to. 982, we're almost there. 1,000! Woo! I have the best Instagram followers on the planet. You guys made the goal, and I'll give you the story of this house. It would be great to have some background music. Give me a moment. It is rumored that this house is very old. So old that it was built in the early 1930s for a wealthy family very close to the Rockefellers. They had so much money that they used this house as a hideout when they wanted to escape from their aristocratic lives. That was how things were 74 years ago when the incident occurred. Do you know the Roosevelt case? Well, I heard from a bank worker the information they're handling is that case was a smokescreen to cover up what happened here. It is said that the only daughter of the family, a thin and sickly 15-year-old girl, claimed that aliens came to visit her every night, asking her to become the matriarch of their people. I will tell you only the essential. Instagram doesn't like us to talk about these topics. After months of affirming the coming of aliens, the girl's belly began to grow. You can imagine the reaction of the family. Understandably, they panicked looking for the culprit, and that was more difficult than expected. The girl was kept confined to the house and only went out to church. I kind of forget the rest of the details, but the story goes on to say that the father was about to settle accounts with the parish priest when in the middle of the night he saw an intense light entering the girl's room. The light was not coming from a street light, but from a large metal plate in the sky. I told you it was bullshit. After that supposed UFO sighting, she gave birth and the family disappeared, leaving the house abandoned. Why didn't the aliens come back for the girl? What happened to the baby? I think they tried to hold on to the UFO story so much because they were going to get in trouble if they killed the most beloved priest in town. They went so far that there is even an amazing amount of metal junk in the basement. I think they tried to put together a flying saucer to confirm their story, but left it abandoned halfway through the process. When it's time to remodel the basement, we will have a lot of fun. That bro says, stop wasting time and tear down the stupid wall. Well, I'll listen to the sourpuss. Let's start with this. What the hell? What is this? Is this real? They can't be human, can they? Humans aren't that small and slimy, right? Oh, they smell so bad. I thought it was the wood in the house or that the pipes were clogged. What should I do? Should I call the police? Is it her? Is she for real? The corpse is human. Damn it, a tiny thing next to her is her baby. I don't know if you guys are watching this, but when I opened the walls, a bunch of small slimy bodies fell from the wall. They smell so bad. Bodies are so wrinkled, greenish tone. Faces not human. Their eye sockets are too big. No nostrils. Small skulls. The other one, I'm sure is a human corpse. It looks like a mummy. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. The spaceship is in the basement. Do you think this story is real? That they were murdered? What do I do? What do I do? Guys, I swear this is real. This is really happening. I don't know what's gonna happen. What can happen to me? Maybe the fluids from these things will hurt me. Or maybe the government will try to hide this. If you don't know about me, I want you to.
Subscribe for more horror stories. In 1935, Samuel Good became one of the youngest sheriffs in the history of Union County. But such honor and glory didn't come without a price. He didn't know yet that he would die in 1978, before he could see his own eldest son, Nicholas, take his place in the police department and follow in his footsteps. Additionally, one of the first things he had to do as the sheriff was deal with another one of Shadyside's infamous serial killers. After receiving a call that said the killer was last seen in Fear Street, Sheriff Good called his two best officers, Oliver Flynn and Violet Mendez, and he said everything he could tell them. "Last night we found the first out of a dozen victims. The perpetrator has been identified as Ed Carson, a Shadyside butcher. He's been on the loose since then. Witnesses have identified him to be wearing his work clothes and apron, carrying a butcher fork. Well," the sheriff paused, cleared his throat, and continued, "We have to stop him tonight. I want the two of you to go to Fear Street immediately and do whatever it takes to end this. I've let this go on for too long." Officer Oliver, considerably older than Samuel, but even more respectful of him than necessary, prepared to go out, but also said, "Sheriff, if I may, this is not your fault." "Thank you, Flynn." The sheriff nodded. Then his eyes moved to the woman in the room, as if waiting for her to add something similar. Oliver was already making his way out to the office, deliberately choosing not to hear whatever his partner would say to the sheriff. "Are you not going with us?" was all Violet said. She refrained from arguing much with the man she disliked since they were teenagers. Samuel Good had been captain of the Sunnyvale football team, and Violet Mendez, a drummer at the Shadyside school band. She'd been hoping to become sheriff one day, and Samuel had recently crushed that dream for her. Was that proud and entitled guy afraid? "Good luck, officer," was the last thing Samuel told her before she walked out of his office. The two police officers drove as fast as they could to Fear Street. The night was eerie and quiet. Everybody was locked in their homes, knowing a serial killer was out there, ready to rip them apart at the smallest chance he could get. Once they made it to the street, the police car slowed down, while the officers inside looked around as attentively as they could. They couldn't see Ed, but soon enough, they found the first sign of him. A disembodied leg. "Oh, God," groaned Violet. "Park the car. I think this is where our hunting begins." "This is disgusting," Oliver nearly gagged, stepping down from the car to shine his flashlight at the bloody leg. "Did you hear what they're calling him?" "Humpty Dumpty Killer," Violet replied with an emotionless voice. "The writers of the front page of the paper are going crazy about him." Oliver grunted in acknowledgement, then nodded at a spot nearby. There was a trail of blood on the sidewalk. The two of them loaded their guns, gripped their flashlights tighter, and started moving. Before too long, they came across a severed hand, dropped on top of some bushes. "Christ, this is only getting more upsetting," Violet complained. "Do you really think he did it?" Her partner's question caught Violet by surprise. "What do you mean?" she wondered. "We literally have 3 witness accounts. The old man Johnson is dead, and now his wife has to raise that troublemaker son of hers alone. One of the Fraser little girls is dead too. And her sisters found the body, Flynn. Pieces of it. Even the sweet old Grandma Berman was torn to pieces. Her children will never recover, I tell you." I know. "Hey, look over here," Oliver said. The trail of blood had drifted away from the sidewalk and into the yard between houses. It was truly getting more disturbing. There weren't full limbs anymore, but small pieces of flesh. Maybe organs, things so bloody and gruesome that were impossible to identify. "There is no way a sane person could do this," the officer continued. "So, you know what people are saying?" Of course, Violet knew. She'd heard the creepy rhymes, the rumors, the scary stories. It all made her scoff. Don't tell me you seriously believe this is part of some witch's curse, Flynn? Back in 1666, Sarah Fear was just a woman. The reason behind Officer Violet's hesitation was a strange noise they heard just then. There was no way to describe it, but a splatter of something. A liquid bursting out of somewhere and hitting the ground. Considering the case they were investigating, the two officers felt a chill in their bones. But they managed to look up. There, barely hiding himself beside some bushes, stood Ed Cameron. He was almost unrecognizable, though. Effectively, he was wearing his work clothes, including the white butcher apron, which was almost entirely red now. And it wasn't the only thing. Ed would go down in history as the Humpty Dumpty Killer, a murderer that dismembered his victims so they couldn't be put back together, people said. After 12 of those disturbing attacks, his hands and face had been covered in so much blood that it looked like he was wearing red gloves and a mask. He was something straight out of a nightmare, but he was unmistakable. He was holding in one hand his butcher knife and the severed head of a man. With the other arm, he was holding up what was left of his victim's body. At first, the officers couldn't react because the shock was too great. But despite their racing heart and nausea, they managed to shoot once, twice, 3 times, hitting the dead body again and again. The killer protected himself instinctively, and during a pause of a second, he threw his victim's head at the officers, hitting Oliver Flynn right in the chest. The officer fell to the ground, more out of terror than the impact, and he screamed. The killer was escaping, but he had somebody's head on his lap, pouring blood on his uniform. Just a couple of feet away, Violet was vomiting on the grass. "I told you!" Oliver cried out after he finally managed to push the head away and let it roll away on the damp earth. "I told you he's possessed! Normal people would never do this." Violet shook her head and wiped her lips. She was remembering all the times she went to Ed Cameron's butchery. He was a friendly and hardworking man with kind eyes. He was a normal person. "Sheriff Good said Ed snapped, that's all," she said. "You have a family, Flynn? So do I. Aaron is waiting for me at home. We have to finish this. We have to kill him so we can all be safe again. Stop thinking about witches." The two officers regained their composure, stood up straighter, and started marching in the direction the killer ran away. They started running, jumping over the puddles of blood, avoiding the hands and legs dropped on the ground. Soon they left the houses behind. They were running on the grass, following this trail of murder. Finally, something clicked in Violet's mind. "Why does it look like he's leaving us a path to follow?" she asked her partner while they continued their chase. They could finally see Ed Cameron entering an empty basketball court in the distance. "Maybe he wants us to kill him. I know I'd want that if..." Oliver didn't have time to bring up the witch's curse again. They reached the basketball court. The place felt uncanny that night. It was devoid of life. It smelled worse than a butchery, because that metallic scent of fresh blood and flesh was human. The moonlight cast a cold glow on the floor, and it reflected off the wet, red puddles. There was a torso without limbs or head lying by the door of the court. The place was surrounded by a very tall chain fence. They got him. He wouldn't be able to get away from there. If only they could keep moving. Oliver, I don't think I can do this, Violet whispered. She was frozen in place, unable to tear her eyes away from that piece of a body that could have been a neighbor, a friend, or even herself. Yes, you can, Violet, Oliver said softly. Not even our good sheriff was brave enough to make it this far, but you did. We can do this together. You know what to do. Possessed or not, that killer is just a man. He's mortal. Just one shot, and all this will be over. Will it? Violet wondered out loud, with a sorrowful tone. This version of Ed Cameron was nothing like the man she remembered. That man was gone forever. There's only one way to find out, Oliver said with a nervous smile. His partner returned the smile hesitantly and took the first step. They walked over the first dead body and entered that war zone. There had to be at least 2 more bodies, but ripped into pieces as they were, it was hard to keep count. Oliver and Violet walked slowly, pointing their guns and flashlights around and trying not to throw up, unless the killer was lying on the ground, acting dead as a way to hide. He was nowhere to be seen. For a second, the officers started fearing the supernatural stories again. But then Violet exclaimed, "Look, on the fence!" She aimed her flashlight upward, and the 2 of them gasped when they saw him. His blood-stained head and hands made him stand out from the darkness of the night. "Police! Stop moving! Come back down now! No!" Oliver and Violet shouted again and again, but the man wasn't listening. They started running toward him, stumbling over arms, legs, and rotting pieces of dead bodies. When they were close enough, they started shooting. The killer didn't even flinch at the noise, and when 2 bullets finally got him, his body shook. The entire fence trembled, but he continued climbing. He wouldn't last long with 2 bullet wounds, but he had reached the top of the fence, and the police officers couldn't look away from what they were seeing. Ed Cameron reached the top of the fence and sat there for a moment, facing the police officers without really seeing him. He balanced a little, the midnight breeze hitting him. His blood was impossible to distinguish from that of every person he had killed that day. Had it really been him? Was it all a trick from an ancient curse that turned innocent people into mindless killing machines? Did it matter at all in the end? Shadyside would always remember Ed Cameron as the Humpty Dumpty killer. The man that killed more than a dozen people, dismembered their bodies, and climbed to the top of a chain-link fence just to let himself fall over and die, putting an end to his own massacre. When old Larry disappeared for 2 long months, all the students thought he had finally passed on to the next world. The archaic, grumpy old man was easily over 80, and from his unhealthy and unkempt appearance, no one would be surprised if the man simply collapsed on the floor from a cardiac arrest.
Damn you kids who don't know how to appreciate the value of high school. If I were their teacher, I'd put them over my knee and beat their asses until they couldn't stand up.
Was the kind of thing Larry used to say when students accidentally stepped on his freshly cleaned floor. His temper was so explosive and nasty that even high school teachers avoided him like the plague. The reason for Larry's disappearance wasn't known until after 3 weeks of silence, when a hastily scribbled letter sent by the old man reported that he had been involved in a car accident on the outskirts of town and that he was in the process of recovering in the hospital. No one was quite sure how an old man of Larry's age was driving a car on an uncrowded road, and even less was known what motivated him to flip his car down the hillside where he was driving on. You would think that an old man's brittle bones would not withstand the force of the impact that left his car total loss. But to everyone's surprise, 2 months later, old Larry showed up early in the morning to return to his duties. The news of the return of the nasty janitor began to spread throughout the high school classrooms within minutes. But by lunchtime, everyone had forgotten all about it and didn't even bother to give the old man a second glance. Larry didn't seem to have a problem with the inattention. He even seemed pleased with the anonymity. He didn't complain when no one asked him about the lack of bandages and scars or his healthy appearance.
Oh, there's so many people here. I want to meet them all before making my mind up.
Was his new motto, and he said it to every person in the high school who commented on his new attitude. The kids who had previously feared the old man found in him a kind and loving grandfather they could lean on. In a matter of a couple of weeks, Larry had become a father figure to many of the students and spent more time alone with them in the supply closet than actually working. The rest of the high school staff didn't seem very pleased to allow an old man to lock himself in a small closet for hours with minors. But despite the teacher's best efforts, at no time was that group of students willing to reveal what they talked about with Larry, and when asked directly, they always claimed that they didn't remember it, but that it had made them feel better. Since there was no sign of abuse or inappropriate behavior, the administration could do nothing but bow their heads and pretend that nothing suspicious was going on when they saw the increased school performance of the kids who talked to Larry. The curious thing was that those students and teachers of the high school who had never been terrified by the janitor felt that there was something strange going on with the old man. Maybe it was his new charismatic way of expressing himself, or how dead his eyes looked when he smiled. For these people, it was as if Larry had been replaced by a degraded copy of what the man used to be. Despite the suspicions of those involved, everything remained relatively peaceful until Avery disappeared. Avery was a low-income 16-year-old girl who lived with her single mother and her 2 brothers. She had never been very responsible in high school, and it was not unusual for her to run away from home for a couple of days. So, it took a while before the police got involved and began the investigation process. Larry was quickly placed among the first suspects. The older man had become very close to Avery recently, and she was one of those who had spent the most time with him in the supply closet.
She was very pretty, but not adequate. Too small and with weak thighs.
He replied when asked if the girl had told him about her intentions to run away. No officer seemed to give much importance to his comment, in the same inexplicable way that the students forgot they were talking to the old man. No one thought of old Larry and his strange closeness to the students again until Ryan, the quarterback of the high school's football team, disappeared under unexplained circumstances. When the police asked Larry what he thought about the case, his only comment was,
He was very athletic, but he had a problem with his frontal lobe that would lead to cancer in a few years.
The police also noticed nothing unusual in that statement, and, against all good judgment, the old man was ruled out as a suspect and was no longer interviewed in the following investigations, even though the next 4 missing boys were also in the group of students who sought his advice. Larry wasn't even pointed out when the corpses of the missing boys were found one day in the high school hallway without a drop of blood in their veins, and with most of their internal organs missing. The bodies appeared to be nothing more than an empty shell of their former selves, and no one seemed to give a damn. Apparently, only the high school staff were outside of the enchantment that surrounded the old man. Not willing to let Larry's strange behavior go unnoticed, the principal decided to call the hospital in search of answers about the man's strange change. The high school principal got his answers, but they were not necessarily what he was wanting. Are you related to Mr. Jones? Yes, I am very sorry for your loss, but we have been waiting 6 months for you to contact us. We need the cost of the hospital fees to be covered, Mr. Jones. Insurance only covers $15,000 and the funeral arrangements. The principal walked to the supply closet, unable to believe what he had just heard. When he got close enough to place his hand on the doorknob, it slowly opened to reveal the image of old Larry, standing upright and smiling with his hands behind his back. A spotlight shone dully on the man, and the principal wondered how he had ever mistaken him for the deceased old man.
I've been waiting for you for a long time, sir. The fun of hunting diminishes when you are not hunted, but this body is starting to get heavy, and your cubs don't seem to be able to withstand transmutation without their immature minds affecting my state of consciousness. I enjoy young flesh, but I need a mature body to begin incubation. You seem like a good candidate. Are you interested?
Said what pretended to be Larry, extending his hand. The director tried to run and move away with all his strength, but his body remained motionless. With terror, he watched how his own hand stretched and squeezed the old man's hand without him being able to do anything to avoid it. The last thing the high school principal saw was Larry open his mouth in a superhuman way, as if he were some kind of anaconda. A strange light was emitted from inside the old man's body, and in the blink of an eye, Larry collapsed on the floor as if he had suffered a cardiac arrest. The principal came out of the closet and began walking through the halls of the high school, but for some reason, he looked a little different.
Hey, it's Kara. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you do, make sure to subscribe for more horror stories.
Complicated. Life is just so complicated. I thought my childhood had been hard, and, well, it was hell. But as time goes on, it feels like life is getting even more difficult. There are good things, of course. I have more freedom and less loneliness, but even those things can bring me trouble, especially my friends. The more I learn about other people, the harder it is to understand them. Friends don't lie, but sometimes they do. And apparently, some people are okay with that. Friends don't hurt or leave you, but sometimes they will hurt you without meaning to, and you will need them to leave you. It can be very overwhelming. Personally, I don't deal well with being overwhelmed. Every time that life feels like too much for me, something terrible happens. Right now, I need to avoid getting in any more trouble. I need to escape. I need to hide from Mike and his feelings. I need space from Hopper and his rules. I think I even need time away from Max and her confusing but good intention. I thought I'd never want to be alone again, but if I could get just a couple of hours without anybody expecting something from me, I would be happy. So I don't even have to think too much about it. I decide to escape, just like I wanted. I'll be back as soon as I feel better, but I need to do this for myself. Hopper is asleep, and everything around our little house is quiet. Someone else, maybe Mike, would say that it is too quiet, that it's eerie and suspicious, but I am not afraid. Nothing that can hide in the shadows behind a tree can be worse than the things I have already seen, things I have already defeated. So I start walking, with my head held high and without looking back. The weather is nice, and the cold breeze feels nice around me. I lose track of how long I walked, but suddenly I know where I want to go, and before too long, I am there. The Starcourt Mall. However, there's something wrong. Where are all the people? Where are all the lights? Where is all that energy and life that made me feel normal when I came here with Max? I can't believe it took me arriving here to realize I only managed to escape my house at night. It's too late. The place is closed. I wasted my time. The feeling of everything going wrong is so frustrating. I tighten my hands into fists and I grind my teeth. Before I could think twice about it, the doors of the Court Mall snapped open with a large bang, and something inside scurries away. Oh, I did that. I couldn't help it. Might as well make the most of it and go in. Who says a day or night alone can't be fun in a closed mall? The problem is that I still feel like there is something wrong. It isn't instincts or logic or anything like that my friends sometimes talk about. No, this is one of those feelings I can't explain. There is something bad going on here, the same kind of bad I have faced before. It is unexplainable, in the same way that I know I'm different from everyone else. It is familiar, and it is dangerous. When I start walking around the mall, I don't ignore that nagging feeling. I am aware of it at all times, but I keep going. I walk beside the closed stores, and when that gets boring, I start moving faster and faster until I am running. The few lights that are on start to make things blurry. A rat runs past me, and I jump to avoid it. I start laughing, and I finally achieve that feeling of freedom and calm that I was chasing when I stepped out of my house today. That's when I almost crashed into a woman. "Hey kid, watch where you're going." Hearing that voice makes me stop in my tracks. The shock alarms me, and I accidentally make her cleaning cart jump a few feet in the air. When it crashes back down on the floor, a lot of things spill from it. She sighs gravely, and I blush in embarrassment. "I'm sorry," I say, in a small voice, approaching her carefully. "Can I help you?" At first, the woman is frozen in place, confused. But technically, she didn't see this funny cart flying. Her exhaustion wins over her fear. She decides to ignore whatever weird things happen, and she kneels beside me to pick up her things and put them back where they belong. "What the hell are you doing here, kid? How did you even get in?" she asks me, but I don't know what to answer, so I simply shrug. And this woman sighs again. "Okay, you know what? I'm tired. I won't tell anyone you were here if you help me finish putting these rat traps around." At first, I am confused. I don't know how she could tell Hopper or Mike that I was here, but I don't want to risk it, so I nod. "Rat traps?" I ask her. "Yes, dear," she says, and stands up from the floor. She dusts off her clothes and tells me, "I noticed there were some huge rats here, so I decided to put on some traps and some poison. We have to hide them, and..." She stops talking, and I stop paying attention to her. There is a sound coming from behind me. She probably believes it is a rat, but I can tell there is something bad near me. I turn around, and there is the sound of something like little feet tapping on the ground, but sharper. It definitely has claws bigger than any rat. The rustling sound comes from a trash can. The woman behind me is sweating and muttering something I don't understand under her breath. Praying, I think some people call it. She probably realized rats can't be this noisy. Suddenly, the trash can falls to its side, causing a loud metallic crash sound. It startles us, but when a small Demogorgon comes out running from it, the woman really starts screaming. "What is that? What the fuck is that? Christ!" she shrieks, and I find it a little annoying. "Calm down," I try to reason with her. "I have seen that before. We have to get rid of it. But I don't think your poison and traps will work." "Are they mutant rats?" the woman asks me. It takes me a moment to answer. "Yes." She scoffs and reaches for her cart, from which she pulls a broom that she holds tightly in her hands like a baseball bat. "Then let's get rid of that plague, kid." She grins at me, and I smile a little at her too. "You can call me Clara." So we get to work, and to be honest, we make a really good team. Clara freaked out at first, but then she turns fearless, and she doesn't ask me any questions. We begin chasing the tiny monster that ran out of the trash can, but before we could reach it, we find ourselves exposed, in the middle of the mall, and from somewhere, a small Demogorgon falls down on top of Clara. She screams even louder this time. I swing my arm out in front of me and the monster flies away, until it crashes against a wall, but I keep my invisible hold on it. It gets tighter and tighter until its bones break with an ugly crack, and all life leaves its tiny body. Clara is okay. Her hair is just a little messy. She looks a little scared of the creatures and me, but after I just saved her, she must realize it's best to stay by my side. I'm still watching her when I notice she starts frowning. She runs toward me, and I am almost about to push her back to protect myself, but she doesn't attack me. She raises her arm and just behind me starts hitting a Demogorgon with her broom. She's strong and merciless with plagues. The small-sized monster whines and squirms in place, while this woman hits it again and again. I narrow my eyes at it, and after a couple of seconds, it completely explodes when she hits it again. "Wow!" Clara chuckles, impressed with herself. I think she wanted to say something else, but I interrupt her. "We don't have time. Look." I point behind her, and she gasps in horror. Instead of running in fear upon noticing we were killing some of them, the Demogorgons come out of their hiding places and get ready to attack us. More than a dozen hungry mouths, those slimy, ugly bodies, moving desperately and almost blindly. I didn't have time to think about where they came from and why they're here. I know I can hold my ground. But I am worried about my new friend. Do you have a gun? I ask her. She closes her eyes and takes a deep breath. Oh, I am so going to lose my job for this, she says. Then she reaches into her cart, and I'm confused when I see a can of something in her hand. Also, from a pocket of her dress, she brings out a lighter. I don't have time to question it though. The monsters finally jump on us. At the same time that I raise my hand to send them flying away, Clara raises both arms and somehow manages to cause a great flame to surge from her hands towards the monsters. A laugh escaped from me. I am impressed and ready to fight at her side. These monsters are hideous, but these are very young ones. They are easy to kill. They run at us from every corner. Clara kicks them. I make them fly in the air. She burns them. I make them explode. The floor starts to cover in their blood and guts. It starts getting on our clothes, and some of their bodies even catch fire and continue to burn. I wave their dead bodies around, hitting the last living monsters with them until every last one of them dies. In the end, I am exhausted, but it is liberating to have experienced this by myself. My new friend looks even worse than me. She's breathing heavily, sweating, and I think she's crying a little, or she's going to throw up. I am definitely not cleaning this up, she says in a whisper. I think I'll need to find a new job. I'm not sure if she is talking to me, but her words make me smile. It was a horrible experience. Maybe. I think at some point I was afraid. It is a little annoying that I couldn't just get one night for myself without getting in trouble. But now I am ready to go back home.
My mother has never understood why popularity is such an important thing to the guys of my generation. I can easily understand how a boomer isn't able to conceive the impact of social media in the lives of teenagers, but that's the way things are. This is a new era, and those who don't jump on the bandwagon are left behind. When my mother was a child, her dream was to be an astronaut. When I was a child, my biggest dream was to be an influencer. This is the lifestyle I have decided for myself, and I don't think it's fair when my parents ridicule my dreams because they don't go along with their archaic ideas that their parents put into their heads. If they didn't achieve their goals, it doesn't mean that they should sabotage mine. Being an influencer isn't an easy job. Not just anyone is able to generate a community around their image. It takes years of dedication. In a highly competitive world where idiots think they're smart and capable of beating the system. Therefore, I have to fight from a young age to even form a career in social media. An influencer has to be fashionable and trend-setting. So when TikTok started making a name for itself, I didn't hesitate for a second to create an account. My trajectory in TikTok started like anyone else's. I uploaded videos 2 or 3 times a day, doing lip-syncing and inventing my own dances. As time went by, my popularity started to grow, winning me a lot of hearts and being replicated by hundreds of people. My followers wrote me, sending me comments about how beautiful and talented I was. There was even a man who offered to send me gifts to my house just because he thought my face was cute. I was loved like I'd never been. Without a doubt, the best 6 months of my life. As much as I like the app, I must admit that becoming famous is almost like a matter of luck. One day you're popular, the next day they forget about you. Staying on trend is difficult, especially when you're the one who comes up with the new content. People just don't appreciate your efforts and your desire to innovate. So the easiest way to stay afloat is to replicate what the successful ones do to attract an audience. It didn't take me long to discover that the more dangerous the challenge is, the more people like them. Morbidity sells, and I'm even willing to sell my soul to the devil to achieve my dreams. In my quest for fame, I tried many things, some more ethical than others. Each new experience was exciting and filled me with adrenaline. But they weren't enough to make a name for me in the industry. That's how I discovered the Outlet Challenge. My first attempt was a failure. I remember I was spending the winter vacations with my family in a hut in the middle of the forest that they had rented for 2 weeks. And that day, I had argued with my mom for the amount of hours I spend on my cell phone. And I was locked in my room posting several videos on TikTok that had gotten almost no interaction. I was frustrated and angry. Those feelings were what motivated me to introduce my cell phone charger in the outlet, leaving just enough space to insert a coin. Nothing happened. The stupid outlet didn't even generate a few measly sparks. I felt like I was about to scream when I had to delete the video. This feeling grew over me for the next 4 times I repeated the challenge. Out of sheer frustration, I tried another outlet to make sure that I wasn't doing anything wrong, and that the problem was in the weak electrical network of the place. When I placed the coin, my hand instinctively withdrew before a bunch of blue sparks threatened to burn my fingers. The reaction was immediate and beautiful. No more than a couple of seconds passed when the plastic cover of the outlet and charger turned black and smoldering, releasing that distinctive smell of oil being burned. I had inadvertently overloaded the hut's power supply, and we spent the last 3 days of our vacation in complete darkness. It was ridiculously funny for me to watch as my parents searched for the source of the problem I had caused. They didn't even suspect me. Unfortunately, I hadn't recorded my only successful attempt. The things that become popular on TikTok in one way or another ended up becoming the headlines of newspapers carried by old failed reporters who don't understand the way that we guys have fun nowadays. The sensationalist news warned that the outlet challenge could generate fires, attracting a lot of new users who had come to the application just to see if that was true. And I was there to please them. I inserted coins in the school, in the park, and even in the church, ruining the electrical systems each time. After the 10th attempt, I stopped counting the damages. No one noticed, even when I posted the videos on TikTok. No adult bothered to look at me. None of my classmates accused me, as if I wasn't important enough to earn their attention, as if I didn't exist for them at all. In TikTok, things were different. There was an audience that adored me and cared deeply about me. I was the only one in their eyes, as long as I gave them what they wanted. To survive in TikTok, you have to be on trend, and they were no longer satisfied with sparks. I needed to create an explosion, a real fire. They had given me everything, and I wanted to make them happy. I wanted them to continue to see me as their queen. Maybe the devil manifests himself in different ways, pressuring you and taking you down the slope until it's too late. I gave myself to the madness of the abyss, and I didn't hesitate for a second to obey him when they asked me to block the exits and ignite the sparks with the stove gas open. I was the only one who went out. The skin on my face and my right leg ached from the second-degree burns I had suffered. Standing on the sidewalk in front of my old house, I stood motionless, watching the fire grow. I felt as if I was possessed by something bigger than me, something that complimented me and whispered nice words in my ear, while my hatred spread throughout the walls of the place I had never considered my home. From the window, I could see the now Persian carpet that my mother loved more than me was covered by a layer of fire that moved like a beautiful wave of sea to the sofa. The fabric was burning, and the smell of burnt plastic began to flood my lungs. The flames climbed up the stair railings to where they slept. Then the dark and peaceful night was covered by agonizing screams, masked by the sound of crackling that lulled me. The firemen didn't even arrive until the fire had consumed everything of value, including the useless lives of my parents. The newspapers loved the sad news of an orphan who loses everything. No one suspects the poor innocent girl who had seen how in one night everything that belonged to her was gone. My followers loved it. They congratulated and flattered me for what I had done, for how I had given what was deserved to those who hurt me, with their indifferences and selfishness. They deserved it. The show never ends. Or, that is what they say. I know it won't be long before someone inside the case of my parents' deaths discovers my TikTok user and sees everything I've done. Anyone who is even a little bit interested in me will be able to see everything I have shared with those who love me. I'm so grateful to those who follow me that I want to give them another big show before I leave. As a minor, I've been in the hands of the state since the terrible accident. And right now, I'm staying in a foster home with 7 other children. My new parents don't even care about us. They're too focused on the money that we are generating for them. And those who should be my brothers don't pay attention to me. They treat me like an idiot and a spoiled child. I think it's time to teach them a lesson. I wonder if when I get on the news, I'll be able to break the 1,000-follower barrier.
I think I was about 7 years old when my mother started to fall into alcohol. The recent divorces with my father hurt something deep inside her, and she never really fully recovered. Seeing my mother dying of grief made me believe that love was a deadly disease that I would never want to suffer from. I didn't want to give that power over to me to anyone. Then Lilith arrived at the high school. My beloved Lilith moved into my neighborhood when I was 11 years old, and I only had to lay my eyes on her to be captivated by her beauty. There was something mesmerizing in the dark gaze of that pale girl with the mischievous smile that made my heart immediately fall at her feet. I would have liked things between us to have worked out, but I was so immature and unstable, so desperate for approval that all I could do was secretly adore her while she was fooled by a jerk high school student who didn't know how to appreciate her, by the way. I loved her. I mean, I really loved her. I think I'm still loving her, even though I'm terrified of her. I knew that my love and admiration for Lilith was not shared by everyone. But I never imagined how she was affected by being one of those outcasts of the high school. I witnessed how other girls made fun of her dark way of dressing and her dramatic makeup. They all seemed like idiots to me, but there was very little I could do against the older boys. I tried to be there for her both inside and outside of high school, supporting her with my company. I thought we had found comfort in each other. I wanted to avoid going home and crossing paths with my mother, and she just wanted to be loved. Just not the way I loved her. Today Lilith called me around 3 a.m. because she needed me urgently. As a fool in love, I did my best to quietly escape from my room and ran all the way to her house, too afraid that she would put herself in danger. Her parents were high-ranking military officers who always left her home alone with a wide variety of weapons, and she had been hurt herself before. When I arrived at her front yard, she was already waiting for me leaning against the front door frame.
You came.
She said to me in a dull tone. She looked terrible. Big circles covered her face, as if she hadn't slept in many days. Also, her hair and clothes looked disheveled. She looked like a zombie. You know I would, I replied. She looked so nervous and her cell phone notifications kept ringing.
Come in. No, better wait here.
She slammed the door in my face, and I stood there in the middle of the night until minutes later she came out of the house with a thin black box in her arms.
Come on.
She grabbed my hand and we started running. We looked like two lunatics as we made our way through the dark streets of the city. We ran and ran until my legs started to hurt. I was about to ask her where we were going when she suddenly stopped at the entrance of our high school.
I heard once that a boy committed suicide in the arts classroom of this high school. Let's go inside. We
broke into the high school without much difficulty, climbing over a fence in the backyard. We didn't share a word as we opened one of the windows and entered the building. Neither did we speak as we entered the old arts room, and she wordlessly instructed me to sit on the floor.
Have you ever played with a Ouija board?
I shook my head. She clicked her tongue and pulled the board out of the black box she had brought with her. Lilith placed it on the floor and knelt in front of me. We both breathed heavily as she positioned her index finger on the pointer. I mimicked her, remembering an old scary show we had seen once in Halloween.
You can't lift your fingers until we finish the session. The session is not over until the tablet allows us to leave. Got it?
Yes. Do you have any questions? Lilith smiled at me with pity. It was the first time I had seen her smile in months. She lowered her gaze and said to the board,
Suicidal spirit in the arts classroom of this high school. Will I get what I wish?
The pointer stood still for several seconds before sliding violently to the bottom of the board. 0, 4, 1, 1, 2, 0, 2, 2. We read out loud as it communicated with us. What the hell? I asked. I had never believed in magic, but the answer was a little disappointing. An awkward silence stretched into the cold room. She looked even more miserable than before I arrived, and I had no idea how to cheer her up. Will we remain friends forever? I asked out loud, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Our relationship had been so shaky recently that I needed some comfort, and hopefully I could comfort her. 0, 4, 1, 1, 2, 0, 2, 2. We read as the pointer moved. Lilith looked even paler as the numbers came up. I felt angry at the incomprehensible answer. Suicidal boy from the arts classroom of this high school. Will Lilith and I be friends forever? The pointer began to move violently, indicating the combination of numbers over and over again. 0, 2, 2, 0, 4, 1, 1, 2, 0, 2, 2, 0, 4, 1, 1, 2, 0, 2, 2. This is bullshit. I shouted, sick of getting the same meaningless answer. Lilith looked at me very seriously and said,
Maybe it's a date. Today is April 11, 2022. Maybe something will happen later?
Something that will make us stop being friends?
Maybe. It's been hard days. Please don't come to high school today. I don't want to see you here.
I stood completely dazed and confused as she took the board and left the room without finishing the game. My heart arched inside my chest, and I had to fight not to break down and cry in that place. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when I was finally able to return home from high school to my mother's house. Like a lost soul, I went into my room and laid down on my bed, hoping not to wake up until the next morning. I felt so exhausted that it was even hard to breathe. My sleep was deep, but not recuperative. A nuisance in the back of my head hadn't let me rest completely, and my cell phone, which kept ringing, finally brought me back to the real world. Looking at the clock at my nightstand, I realized that it was already close to 11:30 a.m. I stretched my back and inhaled deeply. There were no longer any point in getting ready for high school. Maybe the board was right. Lilith didn't want to see me in high school, and she had gotten what she wished for. Completely sad and sleepy, I took my cell phone and went downstairs to the living room. There, my drunken mother watched the news with unfocused eyes. Without bothering to say a word, I sat down next to her, and I started to check my messages. The notifications kept coming in and threatened to drive me crazy. I clicked on the first notification that covered my screen, and it took me to a video where Lilith was the protagonist. I looked up in terror to try to ignore the private and obscene images that had been imprinted in my mind. But Lilith was there too, on the television screen. Only now, the black clothes she wore to high school were stained with blood. She looked happy, as I hadn't seen her in many years, as if she'd finally gotten what she'd wished for.
Joe. Subscribe for more horror stories. Hello. I am a custom-made robot for you. I adapt fast to my environment and can do as many tasks as I'm given effectively. To launch me, all members of the household must shake my hands for recognition. Myers looked down at the bot drone on its musical voice, and he was lost in thought at once to the endless possibilities of realities of the custom-made bot the family had just gotten. They took turn in shaking the robot's hand, and it registered their heartbeat and thumbprint in its memory. Professor Carlisle watched the robot as well, with keen interest. Long and obsolete are the days with nannies and housemaids, which were needed to keep the home running. Somehow, the world had annihilated that idea, and artificial intelligence now dominated the spheres. Millions of jobs have been lost to AI, for it had been recognized as a super efficient and cost control way of living. Myers watched as his father admired their very first bot. The good professor had reneged against such ideas in the past, and it did not matter that his two children called him all sorts of epithets. As was befitting the man's adamant nature, he stuck to his ideals. But ideals would not work against a family of four, who always have differing views and were at each other's throats. The Carlisles never let an opportunity for a good fight to skip by unattended. So, Martha was shocked when for the umpteenth time she raised the topic about bots, and there were two other voices backing hers. She was Myers' sister and the Carlisles' only daughter. The older Professor Carlisle was notable for everything, but not for getting in long-drawn arguments with his households. The man is copacetic with giving you the silent treatment, then adding you to his already filled timetable. They sat down and looked as they deliberated on what name to give their new possession. Skippy, Ellen Carlisle, the mother of Myers, and Martha suggested. It was the name of their old dog. She died of a long-term sickness, and it was so sad to watch her leave. As expected, the other family members voted no. The event might have happened a long while ago, but none of them had overcome the grief her death presented them. She watched as the room quieted and disgruntled faces murmur. At once, she blamed herself for such a suggestion. Apparently, she thought it was a fun way of keeping the memories of Alsatian near. It wasn't. At least not for the Myers. Martha and the professor. Apologies for the suggestion, Ellen pleaded in an attempt to dispel the sour mood her supposed witness and judgment had invited. Other names were suggested, but it was met with differing opinions. Kraut, Myers said. Though he could not raise his voice up, he was afraid it would meet another round of alternative views, but the name stuck. It was though the debate had worn them out as they all nodded their assent. Good one, Martha mouthed towards Myers, but he did not understand it. He looked puzzled, but did not let that bother him. There was a christening to do, and he just had been nominated as a priest. Your name shall be Kraut, Myers announced, touching the bot by the shoulder. He was wowed by the perfect features of the bot. The producers were definitely artists who knew their onions. Who makes a robot with perfect hair, jawline, and body? Artist. It was more than just technology and efficiency. It came from the minds bearing artful execution. So, there was Kraut, the fifth member of the family, and a powerful artwork of the human mind, ready to offer his service. As Kraut suggested and offered, he was efficient. Kraut did not need anyone to tell it to recharge itself when it was running low on power. He helped the professor study at times when the good old man feels like engaging in conversation. Kraut beat Myers at chess, Ellen at Monopoly, and could tell which lyrics Martha was getting right or wrong. But that wasn't all. It was as if Kraut filled their thoughts or vice versa. Kraut studied the lay of the house and can tell where anyone's stack of cards were, or how much they all owed at present. I can't find my headphones, Myers, Martha said. She stood arms akimbo and was expecting an answer. Myers just stood and was ready to walk to his room when Kraut answered. You placed it on the top of the box in the storeroom. You've got to be kidding me, Martha said, turning to Kraut. I am not, Kraut answered. Martha ran off and soon came back from the store holding the headphones. She hugged Kraut from the back as the bot sat on the sofa. Recharging. Sucker! Martha drawled as she walked past the Myers room. The door was left ajar, so there was no way he would have misread Martha's tantrum. Before she stepped into her room, Martha stopped in her tracks and ran back down the stairs. Both stairs in the mansion they called home arced downwards, and it was possible to be in one part of the mansion and never hear of events ongoing in other parts of the edifice. The architect must have borrowed his design from the 1800s, as the pattern was like that of the dukes and kings in ancient history. The house itself had lasted 100 years. An archaism is a word that fits in its description. Professor Carlisle had brought it up to the modern taste. One could activate the escalator in lieu of using the stairs, but Martha did not fancy that. So she raced down into the living room. Boy troubles? Kraut asked, his eyes still closed. Martha was taken aback, but she merely answered, yes. Can you help? She sat beside Kraut and narrated how the boy in her life never sends flowers or gifts, but was almost always emotionally present. Are you trying to say gift and flowers would not invoke any emotions from you? Kraut asked. Oh, please, it most certainly would do, Martha said, excited. But you have just decided that you lack almost nothing in your emotional bank. Almost is not total, Kraut, Martha said. Humans are never without impediments. In fact, not even their creations enjoy that absoluteness, Kraut announced. What are your impediments? I will tell you soon if you ask the right way, Kraut said. And you must either learn to live with your boyfriend's imperfection or move on to the next. It isn't easy these days to move on. Plus, I love Mike Doherty. Then stick with Mike Doherty, and better still, ask him why he never sent you gifts and flowers. You might be shocked to see what his reasons would be. Can you guess what his reasons would be? I can do better than guess. What? You've never met Mike. Can you read minds? No, but I am mathematics in motion, and can do fast probabilities that streamline my possible answers. But you cannot be right all the time. True, but I don't have to be correct all the time. I just have to be right most times, and people can easily overlook the flaw in your imperfections. When you deliver to them, then you disappoint them. Were you a fucking Dalai Lama in your past life? I do not subscribe to religion or sex, but I can follow you to church if the usher and the pastor would not mind someone who won't sway his body. Okay, I'm all ears. Why do you think Mike never sends me flowers? You don't strike him as the kind of girl that waits for flowers and gifts wrapped up in a box. In fact, he feels you'd be unaesthetic towards such. He had probably planned it a few times, but never got the nerve to get around to sending it. You got to be kidding. Maybe I am. You will definitely find out. Thank you, Kraut. The pleasure is mine, Martha. Martha broached the topic with Mike, and as soon as her boyfriend started droning in the same words articulated by Kraut, all Martha could see was Kraut's face. What the hell is going on? Martha asked, but silently. What did she say? I said I love flowers, and I wouldn't mind being sent gifts. I didn't know you couldn't see that, Martha concluded. I'm so sorry, love. That'll change. A restive Martha returned home, but could not share her encounter with anyone. She had been annoying to Myers. Her father never had the light of day to attend to them, and Ellen was in a world of her own. She wondered what her mother was up to these days. She worked at a pharmaceutical company that eats out almost all of her day, every day. So, mom is the state for Martha's psychological need. Why do you want a divorce? Professor Carlisle asked his wife. They had been married for 30 years, and although the sex had waned and the romance had dwindled down, but they both owned the faults, or so he thought. A flabbergasted Ellen looked at her husband and could not understand what the heck was going on. The truth was, she had dallied on the thoughts a few times and had even made up her mind on it, but she had never made concrete the pronouncements. No one in her home knew what she wanted out of the marriage, and it puzzled her greatly that her husband had divorced. What do you mean, I want a divorce? Ellen asked. more disappointed than surprised. Ugh, I hope I haven't uttered such words in front of the children. Whether it's been uttered or not, you have to answer my question, sweetheart, Professor Carlyle continued. Sweetheart? When was the last time you called me that? Moments ago, Professor Carlyle mumbled. And before that. Are you sure you're asking the right questions, Ellen? You started with the questions. I can't have wearied you out that fast, have I? Ellen shrugged. I will be in my study, Philip said. He stood and left the living room, with Ellen's questions, hanging over the stench of alienation that now permeated the room. The marriage had lasted only as long as Kraut had promised Philip it would. Myers was the only one that saw what the rest of the household did not see. At chess, Kraut moved 7 steps ahead and seemed to see the future. He could tell Myers' next move, and that unsettled the young man. Since then, he avoided him like the plague. He only picked Kraut's intelligence when he felt he was out of sauce and could not find anywhere else. Are you sure we still need Kraut? Philip asked his children. Yes, Martha answered. You can never tell when Mom's gonna return home, but he can. They all laughed. She is not returning, Kraut said. Shut up, Kraut. Shut up, Kraut. Shut up, Kraut. Shut up, Kraut. The 3 of them chorused. Just kidding, Kraut said. And they all stood, expecting a knock. The knock came and there was Ellen standing there. Oh, he really was kidding, Martha announced. Ellen walked to her husband and gave Philip a long kiss. Then, gently placed the ring he gave her in his hands. Have a great life, she said. Then, she turns and left for the last time.
Hey, it's Kara. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you do, make sure to subscribe for more horror stories. My sister and I have managed to survive for a full month now. Like most of the planet, we spent the first few days desperately running around in search of shelter from those terrible monsters. The chaos had been absolute. In a matter of hours, the world collapsed. We still didn't understand much about these creatures. The people we crossed paths with had little bits of useful information for us. Apparently, the monsters were ultra-sensitive to sound. Although this could be potentially weaponized for vulnerable people like us, it only meant that if we made the slightest sound, the monsters would show up in a few seconds and devour our bodies without mercy. After a week or so, desperate for food, and after days of not talking to each other at all, my sister and I entered this abandoned mall. It still had music blaring from its speakers, which should have been a reason to run, but there weren't any monsters around. They weren't coming for this noise. Apparently, the steady hum of several speakers was too much for them to handle. They didn't know what to attack, so they left the place entirely. We made a home there. We could talk, we had space to walk, and we were almost happy. The best part was that the mall was in a pretty good location. We could get most supplies inside it, and when that failed, there were enough fellow abandoned stores nearby. This included the grocery store a couple of streets up north, where we got our food. We went there every couple of days to get as much food as we could. Usually, our trips to get food from there and return to the safety of our castle of endless music went seamlessly. But this time, everything was going to be different. We didn't know it yet, but we were about to risk it all, and potentially say goodbye to this last shred of hope and comfort, and maybe to our entire lives. Before walking out of the mall, we stopped. Once we left the protection of the music, we would have to avoid making any sound until we returned. Okay, Lily, are you ready? I asked her. I'm never ready, she chuckled, and I could tell there was some sadness underneath the sound. But I do have the empty bags, the gun, and the soundproof shoes. What about you?
I smiled and looked down at our shoes. They were regular boots we had covered with the softest fabric we could find, to minimize the sound our steps made. "Let's go," I said, already whispering. We opened the door as cautiously as possible and waited. There were absolutely no sounds except for the gentle summer breeze, but the monsters could be anywhere. We took a deep breath and finally walked outside. We moved slowly, carefully, hyper-aware of every step, every movement of our bodies, the weight of the bags, and the guns. We were constantly looking around, terrified of any possible threat, a creature or a desperate person, but we were completely alone. Still, all the way to the grocery store, our anxiety didn't decline. Finally, we just had to cross one last street to get to the store. And then it happened. My sister gasped. I felt my heart jump in my chest. What could have possibly made her utter a sound in these circumstances? With my hand already moving toward the gun on the waist of my pants, I turned around and found my sister staring at a stray dog. The poor animal was in terrible conditions, extremely skinny, and looking at Lily with desperate eyes. This couldn't end well, I thought. This was a terrible idea. But still, Lily crouched down and the dog happily approached her, and gleefully barked. We were doomed. I loaded my gun and looked around. "Fuck," I whispered, through gritted teeth, when I caught sight of one of the monsters already rushing towards us. Lily and I had a plan in case of the worst case scenario, in case of this exact moment. Cause a distraction, run away. I had the gun, so I caused a distraction. I shot at a fire hydrant, causing a blast of water that mattered mostly because of the sound it made. And then we ran towards the store. I didn't think Lily would carry the dog with her, though. The damn animal started barking in a fury of terror now, completely ruining the distraction I started. The monster was awfully fast, and it noticed us. We barely made it inside the store to close the doors behind us when the devilish creature crashed against it from the other side. The monster knocked its head against the glass door repeatedly, and I could only keep the door closed for so long. Then, that thing crashed its giant head against the glass one more time, shattering a good part of it. Its force sent me down to the floor. One more hit from it, and either of those doors would snap open, or completely break, and it would find me there, lying on the floor in front of it like a perfect meal. I closed my eyes, in preparation to die, and only had time to wish that my sister and the stupid dog made it out alive. That's when the fire alarm went off. It was a startling, piercing sound. It was bothersome enough for people, but it was nearly lethal for these creatures. I took that as my cue to run for my life. The monster was still at the door, squirming in pain and hissing and groaning in pain. It was a truly disturbing sound. I ran from it and found my sister. She was still carrying the dog, and she was standing by the fire alarm. "Grab as much as you can while making your way to the back door," I whispered, knowing it wouldn't matter under the roaring sound of the alarm. "And drop the goddamn dog!" Lily scoffed, and we started running, but the monsters had entered the store. It was really disoriented. The loud noise was messing with it, but it knew there was prey nearby, so it didn't give up. That creature burst inside the store and stumbled around, throwing its arms and claws around, biting at the shelves, looking for human flesh. The sound of its discomfort was something out of a nightmare. It gave me goosebumps. It made me nauseous. Lily and I were trapped with it. The beast moved without reason nor coordination. It sent entire shelves down to the ground and created an immense disaster that turned the store into a labyrinth. "Cameron, over here!" my sister called me, in the best whisper she could manage under these dire conditions. We ran from one aisle to the other. We ducked when the monster started throwing things around. We were close to the back door when one of the objects the creature flew blindly hit me in the back. It sent me straight to the floor, and I bit my tongue to hold myself from screaming, until I tasted blood. But the sound of my fall, Lily's gasp, and the dog's bark we were noticed by that devil of countless teeth once more. Mercifully, Lily finally dropped the dog in order to drag me out through the back door. But it was enough time for me to look back and see the monster stumbling around, trying to make its way to us. Outside, the sound of the fire alarm dimmed. We were completely vulnerable again. I managed to stand up and follow my sister's lead. We each stood on one side of the door, with our backs pressed against the wall, holding our breath and praying for a miracle. Instead, all I got was that bad-luck dog jumping at me. I caught him in my arms and held him up against my chest, just as a reflex. Then, that awful beast stormed out of the building through the back entrance, and once more I felt my heart skip a beat. I moved a hand to hold the dog's snout closed tightly, to keep it from barking again and getting us all killed. Then came the most tense moments of my entire life. I swear I wasn't breathing at all. I was even afraid of blinking. But I couldn't keep my heart from beating, and I was almost certain that the monster could hear it. If anything, I wished the dog and I were loud enough to get that thing to attack us, so my sister could escape. Seconds felt like hours, and I was sweating through my shirt in terror. I couldn't stop staring at the creature. Its lanky limbs, its gross, thick skin. The way its entire head seemed to be nothing but a ravenous mouth that expanded in pieces as it listened and listened. I glanced at my sister and noticed that she was crying. And then, the monster finally jumped. It jumped upward. It rose up in the air and caught a passing bird in its mouth. That was the break we needed. Lily and I started running, and I didn't let go of the dog's snout. We ran faster than we ever did. We were as silent as possible, but of course that incredible beast noticed. It started chasing us. It was 1,000 times faster and stronger than us, but luckily it was uncoordinated and prone to being distracted. I broke a window of every car we passed on the street, igniting its alarm and buying us a few seconds while the monster attacked the cars. But as soon as it noticed that there was no life to consume and bodies to eat, it resumed its attack on us. This time, it was my sister who shot a fire hydrant. The water reached and drenched us, as well as the beast. It got us the final sense of advantage we needed to reach the mall. We jumped forward when we reached the door. We lay on the ground, and I let go of the dog. We scrambled as far away from the street as we could, but as we turned around, the monster was there, inside the mall, facing us with its demonic head full of teeth. The monster started squirming again. The music coming from the mall speakers hadn't stopped. In fact, after the quiet of the street, it felt even louder. It was coming from every corner, and it was beyond overwhelming for the monster. That horrendous thing whined and agonized. For a second, I fantasized about seeing its head explode. But before anything else could happen, the creature retreated. It walked out of the mall as far away from it as it could. Lily and I exhaled the most relieved sighs of our entire life. We stayed there on the ground, crying, sweating, struggling to breathe, and waiting for our heart rates to return to normal. When that stupid dog happily trotted back to us and started licking my face, my sister laughed. "I hate you so much," I told the dog. "But welcome home, I guess."
How are you feeling, Harper? Like shit. Who are you? Where's Carrie? Your friend sat by you all night. I sent her home to get some sleep. I thought I'd take over. She's sweet. But who the hell are you? My name is Officer Palmer, but you can call me Flora. I've been sent to get your statement about what happened yesterday evening. Do we have to do this right now? I'd rather not think about it. I'm afraid so. This is when your recollection is most vivid. I'll try to make it as painless as possible. I don't want to deal with this. Harper, listen. A lot of costly equipment, parts, and an entire vehicle were lost in yesterday's accident. A powerful company and a lot of rich assholes in expensive suits are looking for someone to blame. If you don't tell me what happened now, they'll make up a story that benefits them. And the person they blame could be you. Do you understand? I can't. Can you at least try? I know you just woke up. I could go get you some coffee or... You don't get it. Enlighten me. I didn't just wake up. I haven't slept at all. I try, but I just can't. I'm scared. Scared of what, Harper? I had never taken one. Well, not since they added the drivers. You'll have to be more specific, Harper. Take one what? And what drivers are you talking about? An Uber. I haven't used an Uber since they added the Android drivers. It's like when they make a new vaccine. You wait until everyone else gets it and make sure it doesn't have any bad side effects. I waited for a while. I'd never heard of anything happening with the androids. Guess that's now changed, huh? Go on. I missed the bus home. I have to commute to work and it was going to be hours before another one ran. I didn't want to wait, and no one would come get me. When I got the app, I didn't even realize that Uber doesn't use humans anymore. They've gone completely robot. Did you know that? Yeah, well, I didn't really have a choice. I booked one and waited. It showed up fast. When they work, they're definitely efficient, I'll give them that. My door opened automatically and I got in. I didn't even want to look at it. The entire idea is so crazy to me. But it kept talking to me. It felt rude not to say something back. What did you talk about? What the hell could we talk about? It's an Uber driver. That is all it is. That's all it was programmed to be. It kept asking me if I was ready to proceed. I guess it needed to record my confirmation or something. I finally looked at it. God, I hate that I did. They could have done a better job at making them look human, you know? Sure, they have this rubber flesh with hair, nose, ears, and all the magical things that makes us human, but their eyes, they're so empty and soulless. When they look at you, it's like they don't even see you, or more that they see through you. They see through everything. My Uber android was a man that night. The ID on his dashboard said that his name was Adam. ADAM, Automatic Driving Android Man. He's their newest model. Uber only has a few of him out there. They're in a trial run. Lucky me. I mean, things started out okay, but then it got weird. Weird how? He started driving. Normally I don't pay that much attention, but I guess I was more aware this time. His timing was perfect. He always used turn signals. Never ran a red light or stopped too fast. He was the best Uber driver I'd ever seen. The best driver, period, in fact. I probably would have left him a good review. But then he started talking. What did he say to you? He asked me about my family. Not even human Uber drivers do that. I didn't speak a lot. It was stupid. But the truth is that I didn't want to hurt its feelings. I just listened. I wish I hadn't. He said he wanted a family of his own. I didn't understand that. I mean, are they automated or do they have some form of intelligence? Were they supposed to want things? It didn't bother me so much at first, but then he said that he wasn't considered a person and could never have one. A family. I felt bad for him. I tried to make a stupid joke, to ease the tension more for myself than for him. I said, "Don't worry, Adam. One day you guys will take over things, and you'll have whatever you want." And then he... "It's alright, Harper. Take your time." He smiled. I didn't like it. It was a knowing smile. Like he knew something I didn't. He said, "Don't worry. When we do, I'll keep you warm and safe in my people zoo, where I can watch you for old time's sake." After that, I didn't want to hear anymore. I asked him to please stop talking, but he didn't like that. Keep going, Harper. What happened next? turned and looked at me. I looked out the window, but I could still see that it was staring at me. Its head was twisted around all wrong. Like that girl in The Exorcist. We were at a red light. It turned green, but Adam didn't move. I knew then that something was wrong. He hit the gas so hard my entire body jolted forward. He started racing through traffic. He bobbed and weaved like something out of an action movie. The entire time, he just looked at me. He stared into me. He had no expression at all. It was like he felt nothing. And the whole time he just kept driving. He must have hit over 100 miles per hour. I yelled and yelled. I tried everything I could think of. Stop, let me out, please! Please stop this! It didn't care. It kept driving. We were getting close to the bridge that overlooks a lake. I knew what was gonna happen as soon as I saw the guardrail. Before we hit the water, I looked at him and what, Harper? I saw something there. It wasn't hollow like that before. He wasn't empty. There was something inside his eyes that told me it was on purpose. We hit the guardrail and flew off the bridge. We crashed into the water. My head hit the roof. I felt dizzy. The water was so cold. It was like his eyes, too. Dark and black. What happened to the Uber driver? How did you get out? I couldn't first. The water was pouring in, but nothing was opening. I couldn't get the windows to go down, and the doors were locked. The water was coming in around us. It was up to our chins. I struggled to breathe, but Adam just sat there. It stared at me, never moving, and never blinking. He spoke to me, and then I heard the window going down. I kicked off my seat, and I swam through the window. I looked back for just a second when I was about to reach the surface. Adam's head had turned around, and he was watching me swim away. His hands were still holding the steering wheel, and he was still smiling. The water was burning my eyes, so I closed them and let my body float to the surface. It's all a blur after that. I remember someone pulling me out of the water. I remember coming here. I kept my eyes closed the entire time. I didn't want to open them, and Adam be staring at me. When I did open them in the hospital, Carrie was there. And then when I closed them again, he was. What did it say to you? What? You said it spoke before you swam out of the window. Do you remember what he said? He said, "You will regret making us."
Hello, this is Dr. Edmund Walker. Most people call me Ed. I don't know who will end up listening to this, or even if you should, but I am a scientist and believe that some information should be available to those who seek it. So whether you're an officer of the Galactic Security Services, who has finally arrested me for desertion, or a nosy drifter that happened upon this tape, either way, the story I'm about to tell you is not an invitation. It's a warning. When I was a boy growing up in Georgia, it was a dream of mine that one day I would work for NASA. Well, I actually did. Not as a brave astronaut like I always imagined, but as a temporary hire with a fancy title. Mission Specialist Ed Walker is what they called me. It's been years since humanity managed to colonize on Mars. Thankfully, This venture brought all of Earth's nations even closer together. Who would have thought that something like a massive arc to space would bring about world peace? People unified and have been thriving on the Red Planet. Instead of ambitions to reach outer space, I found myself dreaming of making it to Mars itself and being one of the scientists that gets to delve further into the planet's unknown and mysterious history. My father always said, you should be careful what you wish for. Damn it. They called it the Parallel Anomaly. It's an immaturely described glass-like gateway into another dimension. When I was brought aboard the project, I was informed that the anomaly's existence was to remain top secret. That until what it was and where it came from had been established, there was no need to disturb our hard-sought peace. At the times, I saw their intentions as level-headed, even noble. Noble my ass. They just didn't want to deal with the red tape of a dozen nations to send me in, and I was too excited to notice. Now that I look back, I see it as a hard lesson. Some things, man, just shouldn't poke their noses into. Sometimes we should just run. Well, I did it. Run, that is. I shoved my nose right on in. NASA and the boys at GSS made it easy. They said they needed me. That my theory and study regarding the existence of alternate and varying dimensions of reality was crucial to researching man's most recent discovery on Mars. I took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. I didn't ask questions about risk or dangers. Not when they strapped me into a shuttle for the first time and shot me to Mars. Not when they took me on an overhead viewpoint of the anomaly, where I ignored a perfectly circle of armed guards and wired fence line. And of course, I said affirmative when they asked me, do you understand all risk and possibilities of harm you are subjecting yourself to? I wasn't listening. I wasn't listening. I was staring. It was more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. While they shoved a helmet over my head, I stood several yards away from the parallel anomaly. I almost cried. It was an intimidating 10 feet in height, and its width pushed between 2 and 5 feet. It was like liquid glass that rippled and scattered outwards until it dissipated into Mars's empty atmosphere. It looked like chrome, reflective and shiny. I felt as if I was seeing the face of God himself. Yeah, God. You know something? I think God turned his back on Mars a long time ago. He certainly wasn't watching out for me that day. They hooked me up to a giant tow wrench. They told me that no matter what happens, I would be securely tethered, and there was no risk of me simply disappearing. I guess they'd hope I would sacrifice myself in the name of science and jump headfirst into another reality. God knows, I wanted to. The first steps I took into the circle of guards were timid. Whether I wanted to admit it to myself or not, I was afraid. The closer I got, the more I noticed that the anomaly was softly pulsing. It was as if it were breathing. I felt like it was pulling me, drawing me closer and closer towards it. A wave of healing warmth and comfort washed over me. So, I let it. Eventually, I was standing within arm's reach. The chrome rippling surface solidified when I drew near, and I could see my own reflection inside, like a breathing mirror. And then I saw it, the murky, shadowy visage of a person on the other side. It was as if they were standing just behind me. I even turned around, but I only saw the men and women I had passed previously. They looked on with wide eyes and open mouths from a safe distance. There was no one standing behind me on the surface of Mars. But when I looked back into the anomaly, it was there. The Shadow Man. He drew closer and closer until I could make out his face. Damn it. It was my father in the mirror. He stood behind me and smiled. I felt as if he were proud of me. More people started showing up. My mother, little sister, grandparents, and even my best friend that passed away long ago. Loved ones I had lost and never thought I would see again were all there. They were all on the other side of the parallel anomaly, all with bright smiles. They were there. All of them. I could see them, and all I needed to do was reach out and I would feel my mother's face again. I plunged my fully covered arm into the void and waited for a feeling. Any sensation that would satisfy a need that had been building since I first laid my eyes on the anomaly. Please, I thought, please take me with you. The feelings began slow. It started at my fingertips and gradually moved up my wrist until it engulfed my arm entirely. My heart didn't want to admit it, but my brain knew that my skin was on fire. I looked to their faces for answers. Their smiles were gone. They were screaming. They were in pain. Invisible flames had consumed them, and their flesh was melting away. I could see nothing but skin melting into bone, and the frantic eyes of my mother and father that seemed to say, "Please, please take us with you." But I couldn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't break free. They were holding me inside. I started screaming, "Pull me back! Pull me back! For the love of God, pull me back! You bastards!" The toe wrench couldn't reel me in fast enough. Every second felt like an eternity. I watched my reflection in the anomaly as my own flesh melted away and exposed the stark white of my bones beneath. I screamed in the other dimension, and I screamed in this one. As a scientist, I can't explain it. When they managed to get me out of the suit, my flesh was fine. The suit didn't suffer any damage, and neither did my arm. Even now, it burns like a forgotten scar. The pain I felt never truly goes away. It's only dulled my senses to the point that I just don't notice it anymore. No. As a scientist, I cannot explain what happened on Mars, but as a man, I believe evil has infested Mars itself. I, Ed Walker, reached into the abyss and somehow I survived the cold touch of hell's fire. Our eyes were greeted by the cold and dusty surface of the moon, studded with craters and strewn with regolith rocks. The moon was much larger than I had envisioned. I was strapping on my spacesuit when a disturbing feeling hit me. "I don't feel too well, Tom," I let out in confusion. "Same here, Liam," Tom added. "You feel the same way too?" I asked curiously. "Yeah, I have this pain in my head," Tom replied. "It's probably nothing. I was ready to take my first step on the moon. We had practiced dozens of simulation missions on the moon for years, and we had dreamt of this moment ever since. Our mission was simple: explore the lunar surface for anything strange and collect data and soil samples in just 1 hour. But we had filled our tanks with enough oxygen to last us 30 more minutes. The surface of the moon was nothing like back on Earth. It was lacking any evidence of life, and it was void of oxygen and atmosphere. It had lots of fine, talcum powder-like dust mixed with a complete variety of pebbles, rocks, and boulders, but it was still a delightful sight. "It smells like gunpowder," Tom chuckled. The awkward pain in my head grew every second, but I tried to convince myself that it was nothing to worry about. I was standing above the moon, and that seemed to be the most important thing at the moment. 90 minutes. Tom, you ready?" I said with excitement, and Tom nodded in agreement. I knew I was born for this moment. I could hear the whispers of fulfillment in my head, and not even a headache would stop me. "Is your timer ready?" I'd asked one last time, and Tom nodded in confirmation. We jumped off the lunar module and turned on the timer. Our first steps on the moon were quite rocky as we fought to regain balance and get used to the moon's gravity. The pain in my head was slowly becoming unbearable, and I began to wonder what was causing it. I noticed that Tom was also uncomfortable. Have we done something wrong? I thought to myself, but no. We had heeded to all the necessary precautions. Are you alright, Tom? Not really, Tom replied. I feel like I hit my head on a rock. This was not the experience we had hoped for, but we had to brave through it. We strolled away from our lunar module spacecraft. I was curious to explore everything I saw. We had to keep watch at our timers though, so that we would not get too far past our time. Moonwalking was the most intensive task, yet fun part of our short lunar adventure. We feel like an oxymoron of both light and heavy at the same time. Gravity is such a beautiful concept, I thought. Tom was holding up so far, which was a good sign, although he seemed to be feeling the brunt of the pain more than I was. We collected some samples and were already preparing to return to our lunar module. We were both exhausted, and the pain in my head had spread to other parts of my body. We knew we had to return immediately if we didn't want to pay a heavy price. My vision was slowly becoming blurred, been contaminated by a space virus, I thought. Several thoughts ran through my head as we made our way back towards our lunar module spacecraft. Where is the spaceship? I was certain that this was the spot. I stared at the gray lunar surface, and I could see where our footsteps had begun. My first step was on the lunar surface of the moon, but our spaceship was gone without a trace. Tom fell to the floor. Tom! What's wrong? He had been breathing heavily for a while, and I just wanted to get back into the space module, but now, the entire spacecraft was gone without a trace. I can't breathe, Tom whispered. I stared at my timer. But it's just been about 70 minutes. We still have almost 20 minutes left. My heart began to race, and I stared in confusion as Tom groaned under his spacesuit. My vision began to blur, and once again the pain in my head had doubled. What is going on? I mused. Everything didn't seem logical anymore. The painful headaches, the blurry vision, and now our missing transport. I dropped to the floor as I occasionally took glances at my timer. What was I going to do about Tom? I couldn't even take off his space helmet as I watched him struggle to stay alive. An explosion erupted behind me as my heart skipped a beat. I stood abruptly and shifted my gaze towards the direction of the sound. A thick mist had enveloped the site of the explosion. My sight was still blurry, but I could see something move in the distance. My deepest fears were finally becoming a reality. I'd always feared that something was going to happen during the trip. I dragged Tom to a spot behind a small moon rock as something approached from the distance. I took a closer look at the footsteps in front of me and realized that they weren't ours. What the? I exclaimed as my heart pounded loudly. Running was not a good idea, as gravity was against us and Tom had passed out. He was still breathing, and I hope he stayed that way. I took a glance at my timer once again. I had just 5 minutes to get back into the lunar module before I ran out of oxygen. What could have taken something as huge as our spacecraft without any noise or signs? I became so lost in thoughts that I forgot that I'd seen something move in the mist earlier. I heaved a heavy sigh and jerked my head up to see what had moved in the mist. Nothing. Everything had returned to exactly how it was earlier. No explosions, no mist, and no movements. Am I going crazy? I asked myself as I returned my gaze to the alien footprints. They still looked that way. I heard another bang at a distance and immediately shifted my gaze in that direction. I could spot what seemed like our spacecraft in the distance. Maybe I was wrong about where we'd stepped down anyway. A ray of hope burst through my entire being as I immediately grabbed Tom and hopped towards the direction of the spacecraft. I stared at my timer once again, and it read 3 minutes. I had been hopping into space over the moon for about a minute when I noticed that the spacecraft was not getting any closer. I set Tom down. Fear blanketed my face once again as I stood alone on the entire moon in confusion. What was meant to be an adventurous space trip to the moon suddenly took a sharp turn into a terrifying race for survival. The strange mist soon began to form again around me, was almost convinced that I had lost my mind. I stared at Tom. Tom? Tom! Tom! I screamed in dread, but my voice was shielded by my spacesuit. Tom was gone without a trace. I stared at my timer. 1 minute. All of a sudden, a foul creature grabbed me from behind, tackling me towards the lunar surface and throwing several punches at my helmet. There was something familiar about the alien. I had surely seen it before, but I wondered how. One of its punches made a small crack on my helmet. I had to do something. I immediately buried my knee towards its groin region and propelled it into space with my feet. It seemed to float in space. Suddenly, I remembered where I'd seen the alien. It was a movie back on Earth. My scariest movie. I finally guessed what had been going on all night. Tom, stop! I screamed, but he was probably seeing me too as some sort of extraterrestrial life form. And it took a second before he came to a halt. The mist had settled and we both stood facing each other. He dashed towards me again, throwing his arms forward. I knew it was Tom, so I had to be cautious. I dodged his blow and grabbed him from his back, ripping out one of his oxygen pipes by mistake. As the gas sipped out, my fears were confirmed. We had not been breathing in oxygen since we stepped out of the ship. My timer began to beep. Tom was out of oxygen and fell to the ground unconscious. I shut my eyes and prayed underneath my breath. At least we are going to be recorded in history as the astronauts who never made it back. The 2 astronauts who died on the moon. I could already imagine the many captions on several magazines trying to describe how we died. I opened my eyes once more, and our lunar module stood right in front of me. I couldn't believe my eyes. What is going on? I thought. I shut my eyes and opened them again after a while. The module was gone. I repeated the process, and the lunar module had reappeared. I stared at my timer. It had run down to the very last second. I was out of oxygen too. I kept my eyes wide open, grabbed Tom and carried him towards the module. I had also run out of oxygen, but this was our last shot at survival. And if I missed it, then our stories would be told by someone else. I leaped towards the lunar space module as fast as I could. I didn't have any oxygen left and I couldn't even blink, but I kept my mind and my gaze fixed on the goal as I soared forward. I reached the spacecraft, rushed in, and shut the door behind me as we both fell to the ground. Oxygen had never felt so good. I proceeded to take off my spacesuit and toss it on the ground as I tried to wrap my head around what had just happened as the headache began to lift off. Everything still seemed to swirl around us in a distorted manner. I finally shut my eyes and reopened them again, but nothing seemed to disappear anymore. We had both been hallucinating all along. Just then, a thought crashed into my mind as I immediately sprung up and rushed for the oxygen tank. I read the label on the tank. It read, HLN oxygen. Caution. Causes intense hallucinations. The hallucinating gas we use back on Earth at the space hub for research purposes. But its cylinder looks so much like normal oxygen. Tom had asked me to separate it from the normal oxygen before our mission, but it somehow skipped my mind. We have been hallucinating ever since we put on our spacesuit. I shifted my gaze towards Tom and knelt beside him. He was still breathing. "You'll be fine, buddy," I mused, as I marched forward to prepare for liftoff.
It was 5 days to Christmas. The cold breeze of winter pierced through my lungs as I stared down from our ship at the ocean. We had sailed a few miles from the coast of France. I dreaded the thought of diving several feet into the sea. We were all kitted up for a deep water dive, and the time had finally come. It was freezing cold out here, but I had a mission, and this was an opportunity I may never get again. We held our breaths as we dove into the ocean. Our adventure had begun just like a dream, and there was an eerie silence amongst the team before our dive. The only sound that could be heard was the calm vibrations of sea waves as we splashed into the ocean. We were 5 in number, all armed with special weapons for underwater adventures, and I could sense fear and anxiety engulf the entire team. We knew what was at stake. It was understandable. My heart also raced faster than normal. We had just embarked on a journey into the unknown, and the suspense of uncertainty is the greatest torture of every man. I had left my wife at home, but she understood what I was getting into, and she was in full support, but I hoped to make it back for Christmas in one piece. I was expecting my first child, and this was the 9th month. It could happen at any moment. This was our first ever contact with such a massive alien structure, and an argument had earlier ensued aboard the ship amongst us whether it was a spaceship or an asteroid. We never got to a conclusion. We would soon get to find out anyway, and besides, anything was possible. I had stumbled on a structure in a secret lab at CERN, a book containing art and research about a time machine lay beside it. Even though the technology in the lab was well designed, I thought it was just a hypothesis, but now, the possibility of an actual time machine wasn't far-fetched. We had descended several feet to the bottom of the ocean when we sighted our prize. It looked more massive than it appeared on video and more unearthly. We all exchanged glances before drawing closer towards the massive pod-like object. It was well crafted, and we were now certain beyond doubt that this was no asteroid. It was something more. It looked like a large pod. Just then, a strange thought invaded my mind as I stared at the entire team. I immediately noticed something. We are all dispensable, I mused. I swallowed hard as I felt a tiny tingling in my chest. Did they perhaps know that Clark and I have been working with external agents and feeding them with information about the secret experiments carried out at CERN? I knew Clark. We have been working covertly together for years, but we had to put on the act of strangers. His job was to keep us safe in case anything went wrong. The heavyweight kind of job with a lot of shooting. There were 2 of them on the mission, but deep down, we all knew that if any strange creature sprung out from whatever was left of the ship, only God might just be able to save us. A strange liquid flowed out from within the ship and into the vast ocean, and for everyone's sake, we hoped that it wasn't infectious. "How do we get the doors open?" A voice echoed behind me. It was Clark. "What doors?" I replied. "I don't see any doors." I stretched my hands towards the strange object on instinct, and it seemed to pulsate and sink deeper as I pushed further. I noticed what was happening and swam closer when I was suddenly swallowed into the ship and emerged inside. It was a path that led deeper into the ship. I turned and attempted to return, but the wall was as hard as rock. The rest of the team trooped inside the same pattern. We knew we would eventually have to find a way out, but we focused ahead on the task. A greenish goo flowed out from somewhere within the ship-like structure. It was the same liquid we had earlier seen outside the ship, but it didn't look harmful. Or so we thought. Besides, we were well kitted against extreme biohazard occurrences, so we marched on. Surprisingly, there was no single trace of water in the spaceship, which didn't seem logical as the pod-like structure had fallen thousands of feet from space before crashing into the sea. The ship should be wrecked. "Everyone, watch your 6, Clark whispered. "This ship should be wrecked, but it doesn't look as though it just fell from the sky, which also means that whatever it was carrying might still be in here," he continued. Everyone nodded in understanding. We knew what it was trying to say, and we braced ourselves for anything. We continued deeper into the ship, and my suit's body camera recorded every action. Everything about the ship felt unreal, and we all still had our oxygen masks on. We weren't sure about the nature of gases present in the strange pod, and we didn't want to take any chances. We arrived at a massive room filled with pod-like structures, which hung high above the room. What in God's name? Our jaws dropped when we sighted what was within the pods. The pods seemed like some sort of cryogenic storage chambers because the entities looked too large to be newborns. We couldn't be sure anyway because we had no idea about their method of reproduction. This was otherworldly. I couldn't contain my surprise. I could hear loud gasps from the rest of the crew. I exchanged glances with Clark as we proceeded further into the area. My curiosity flared up.
I knew it,
I whispered underneath my breath.
I knew there was more.
The aliens in the pod were not the only surprise. They also had prime technology beyond our farthest imaginations and were much more advanced than what we had on Earth. They were a mockery of our level of technological advancement. My eyes widened when I spotted something in the distance. I could recognize that structure from anywhere. It was the same structure I had seen in the lab at CERN a few days ago.
Another time machine?
I muttered. I struggled to wrap my mind around the strange coincidence. Why do the aliens have another time machine similar to the one I had seen in the lab? I asked myself. Or did it perhaps serve another purpose to them? Several thoughts began to plague my mind as I stood in childlike wonder. Did CERN plan all of this? My heart skipped a beat. I knew this was too much of a coincidence. They had been studying about this particular species for years, and now they were here. We had spent several minutes in the strange pod-like object when Clark stepped on something, sending a resounding echo throughout the room. I could swear I saw something move in the dark space above us, and I instantly narrowed my sight towards the area. Suddenly, I saw it again. Something definitely moved above me. I couldn't get a clear glimpse of it, but the pounding of my heart was enough warning. Another sound. I jolted back in shock as everyone in our team exchanged glances. Well, not everyone. My colleague, Dave, had gone deeper into the ship and away from our sights. I stared closely back above into the dark, and my eyes were unexpectedly greeted by an odd sight. Something hung above us in the dark, watching us closely. Its shadow reflected on the walls of the ship as I held my breath in panic. I retreated slowly towards the door in shock, as though I had just been captured in some sort of trance. What were we expecting anyway? I thought. We had walked right into Hell's Gates, and we expected not to get burned by their flames. "Watch out!" Clark's voice echoed throughout the place. A loud shriek was heard from a corner in the room, followed by audible screams of one of the scientists. It was Dave. I stared at Clark, who was now racing towards me with dread all over his face. He had seen something. The others followed instantly, screaming at the top of their voices. Whatever they had seen was scary enough to make them run and scream with such terror. I took another glance at the pods which hung above us. They seemed to be opening up. This is not good. It was time to go. I turned immediately, racing out of the room. I was, however, caught with a new challenge. We had not discovered a way out yet. I stared down at the green goo which was still flowing steadily on the floor of the ship. I followed its motion and hoped that it would guide me to an opening, perhaps. Clark and the others still raced out behind me. They had earlier gone much deeper into the room. I was still not sure what I was running from, but I didn't care. I had gathered enough information, and all that mattered now was getting out alive in one piece. I continued to sprint further away, and I could hear several shots being fired at a distance, followed by the screams of someone else. I arrived at the spot where the green goo flowed out, and it was still a dead end. The liquid somehow found its way out, but the walls of the ship were still hard as rock. Clark soon arrived with the last scientist. I knew whose screams I had just heard. "What did you see?" I asked, but they were both in shock and they stared blankly at me. Clark then proceeded to fire several rounds at the wall of the spaceship while screaming atop his voice in an attempt to blow open a hole in the spaceship and get the hell out. But the walls didn't seem affected by the gunfire. Loud noises emanated from the far end of the passage. We knew what was coming. I wrapped my fingers around my weapon and braced myself for anything that emerged from the dark path before me. I hadn't caught a clear glimpse of these creatures yet, but I hoped to make it out alive for my family. I breathed hard as we all turned and readied our weapons.
They lied to us. We are not alone in the multiverse, and they have known for decades. They have been studying the thriving civilization in the multiverse beyond our galaxy. Yes, a multiverse. A few universes exist beyond our sphere of reality. A few days ago, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN was activated, and although it was stopped halfway due to a few worrisome predictions, I believe something else happened that day. Something dark and unseen. The tension and terror on the faces of a few of the scientists were enough to raise questions in my consciousness. As you all know, I have been a scientist at CERN for decades, and my new promotion grants me access to top-secret research in the organization. Something was born that day, and they know it. There was a recent crash in the Atlantic not far from France, and I'm still investigating for a connection. An otherworldly structure descended from space and plunged into the ocean. The media is trying to cover it up, but I've seen the clip, and it is real. They are hiding something, and I know it. I've gained their trust, and I intend to know what they are hiding. In a meeting today, I was chosen as part of the 5-man team to dive deep into the ocean at the site of the crash and investigate the sinister-looking object which descended from the heavens. This is a Class 5 top-secret mission, and I would be dead if they find out that I have established communication with an external source about this. I have to go now. I'll report my findings after the investigation. Godspeed.
A man in a leather jacket stood at the alley, watching little children skate on the frozen ice in the distance. He chuckled at their innocence. It reminded him of his early days before his demons came clawing. He could hear the loud orchestra from an Orthodox church at the far end of the street. Ah, St. Louis, he mused. His head danced along with the sweet melodies of the Christmas songs. He sang along as trickles of snow hugged the ground. The scent of fried chicken hovered in the air, and he longed for a bite. He groaned when he heard soft footsteps stroll towards him. His trained ears picked up the sound from a distance. He would know those footsteps anywhere. He rose from his seat and turned around. It had already begun to get dark. Bonsoir. A man in a tuxedo strolled towards him, motioning for a handshake, but he refused a gesture. He had seen the strange object descend from the sky in a clip, and he knew that they were going to come around, asking him to help them to do another of their dirty work. Mission? He asked. A man escaped the event at the crash site, and I don't want him speaking about whatever he saw to anyone. His name is Wong. I'll get other details across to you shortly. You know what to do, Dr. Williams said. The assassin nodded and disappeared into the nearby crowd. I had made it out alive, but I now had a much bigger challenge. I had the recorded footage, and the world needed to know, but I had just received a text a few minutes ago. My family was in danger. I was caught between two choices. They wanted the video clip in exchange for my family. But I knew that was an obvious lie. They were going to kill us immediately when they get their hands on the video clip. What have I done? I had dreaded this moment for a long time. I never wanted my family to get involved in this. I wasn't even sure whether they knew that I was working with the United States government. I was a bit reluctant to send an update on my findings to my true employers. Several thoughts swirled around my mind as I drifted back to what had happened on the ship the previous day. We had readied our guns, and we were prepared to shoot at whatever sprung out from the dark path in front of us, when the walls of the spaceship suddenly gave way as several men in advanced suits trooped into the ship. They slaughtered every single creature in the ship, as though they had been training for years. These men obviously had prior knowledge about these new alien visitors. Their weapons looked highly advanced. I had joined them in the fight, but I was knocked unconscious by one of the aliens. But just before I shut my eyes, I caught a glimpse of a last disturbing act. Some of the men turned on us and shot at what was left of my team before retreating out of the ship. They had probably presumed that I was already dead. The maritime city of Venice was home to thousands of tourists from around the world. My wife sat patiently in the empty room with her hands on her baby bump. She prayed earnestly in her heart that the baby would just hold on a little longer until she was out of the place. The assassin paced around the room. He was disturbed about something and seemed to be having a bad day. Suddenly, loud shots erupted from outside the room, and he immediately rushed out to check what was going on. After a short while, new faces emerged into the room. Men in strange uniforms trooped in. They looked American and appeared to be covert operatives. "Don't be scared. I'm Clark. We're friends of your husband," one of them said before returning outside. The next few words she spoke were enough to send the entire room into an instant pandemonium. "The baby's coming!" My phone vibrated again. I had been waiting for their call for hours, and it finally came through.
"Wong, it's Clark."
The past few days had been confusing enough, but this was the height of it. What? How? I saw you die. How did you get to my wife?" I struggled to find the right words.
"It's a long story, Wong, but for now, your wife is safe with us. We will get her somewhere safe so you don't have to worry about her for now. But be very careful. The assassin escaped our grasp, and he will be coming straight for you now. We have sent him a few men to your location, but he might get to you first, so stay frosty." He seemed to be surprised when he saw us, which is a good sign. They didn't know until now that we had been working undercover. You can send in the video clip now.
Clark's words were assuring, but I was baffled at how he managed to get out of the alien pod alive.
"Oh, one more thing, Wong."
Clark's voice resurfaced on the phone.
"You're now a dad."
It took a while for the message to sink in. The dilemma I was in had made me forget about her condition. "Can I speak with her now?" I wanted to hear her voice.
"Just send in the clip. The men should be at the pickup point soon. You'll be seeing your family soon, Wong."
I sent in the recorded clip and disappeared from sight. I couldn't wait to see the new addition to my family. The ferocious waves of the ocean splashed across the docks as fishermen trooped everywhere, going about their business. There seemed to be a loud clatter that stemmed from amongst the crowd. Someone was screaming something about seeing a strange creature on the beach. He had hacked down his son with a knife while screaming at the top of his voice about seeing a strange being. There was terror evident all over his face. He killed his own son. A few minutes later, another woman began to act similarly. She was pointing at me. I had to do a double take at a nearby mirror to be sure if I still looked normal. The woman ran away from the area in fear. My thoughts immediately trailed back to the green goo which I had earlier seen from the ship. I prayed that my assumptions were wrong, but something was definitely strange about the simultaneous actions of both of them. Sirens blared up in the distance as someone else began to react in a familiar pattern. Something was wrong. Out of nowhere, a spitting bullet whizzed past my ears, missing my head by a small fraction. I ducked on instinct and snaked my way amongst the crowd. The bullet had hit someone else, and chaos instantly broke out among the crowd. I took advantage of the growing chaos and hid in the numbers. As I ran with the crowd, I spotted several other people who alleged to be seeing strange creatures. They all became homicidal, killing anyone and everyone along their path. I spotted a man in a leather jacket chasing after me. That had to be the assassin. I meandered around the fleeing crowd and prayed underneath my breath for the US team to come get me, and my prayers were soon answered. Clark stood inside a chopper which approached towards me, and the killer disappeared into the moving crowd. I wasted no time in hopping aboard, and we instantly sped out of the area. I had cheated death the second time in 2 days. It felt good to be on American soil again. My wife and daughter were healthy and safe, but chaos was breaking out in the world. A strange pandemic was spreading. We weren't sure what sort of pathogens were released. Infected persons hallucinated about seeing normal humans as terrifying creatures and instantly became homicidal. I knew that it had something to do with the greenish goo that seeped out of the spaceship on our trip down the ocean, but I had no certain proof, and we couldn't conclude whether it was waterborne or also airborne. "How did you survive?" I saw them shoot at you. I turned to Clark. They weren't much of a good shot, he said while munching on some peanuts. It wasn't a convincing answer, but I didn't push it. Belle was here too. She was the third mole in CERN. Her mission was to use the distraction of the crashed ship and hack into their top secret database about the Hadron Collider and their plans with all indications. She was successful, but with the look on her face, it wasn't good. Briefing in 5, someone's voice echoed from the speakers. The meeting had lasted for about an hour, and we realized that what was going on was bigger than what we had imagined. I was chosen for another mission along with Clark, and we knew that we would never return this time. I couldn't tell my wife about the mission. Was I being a bad father? I thought, but it wouldn't matter anyway if Dr. Williams' plan pulled through. The entire world would be subjected to his will. We had to stop this madness before it began. Most horror stories often began with a crazy scientist, and this one was no different. The information gathered by Bell had revealed that Dr. William, along with the various top scientists at CERN, were plotting to dominate the world in a highly unlikely manner. They had known about the aliens and their technology for decades and had been trying to discover a way to lure those species to Earth. And that was the secret purpose of the Hadron Collider. They weren't just attempting to create a god particle. They were creating a signal that the outworldly creatures would not be able to refuse because they had something in their possession. The other piece of the time machine. How they had gotten it, she could not explain, but she said the aliens would give anything to get it back. When they started the Hadron Collider a few days ago, they had sent a strange signal into the dark cosmos. It was picked up by the aliens, and they responded with the first team whose ship crashed into the Atlantic, which was also part of the plan. According to Bell, Dr. William discovered a way to control the time machine, but he would need some of the aliens to be able to start up the machine. With such technology in his grasp, he'll easily take control of the world. He had gotten all the necessary ingredients for his malicious plan, and we had to race against time to stop it. We decided to keep the recorded clip away from the public for now until our mission was complete, as it would spread more panic in the already growing chaos. The infection had spread wide, and scientists around the world researching for a solution. Dr. Williams was aware of the incoming threat. The assassin had informed him of the failed mission, but he didn't seem to care anymore. He had gotten his prize, and nothing else was more important to him. Thousands of alien spaceships journeyed towards the Earth to retrieve their prize. They had probably lost contact with the first spaceship, and they knew that something was wrong. The world was also burning in chaos, but he didn't care. If the time machine worked, he could bend the hands of destiny and make his own reality. He had longed for this since he was a child, and his dream had finally come to life. Years of planning and research had been put into this moment, and he wouldn't give it up for anything. I am the new god, he whispered, smiling to himself as he watched the second piece of the time machine being set in front of him. It had been retrieved from the crashed ship. He stared at the sinister-looking creature, which was wound up a few meters beside him. It was about 6 feet tall, and its skin was green. The device only recognized its makers, so Dr. William needed the alien for the startup. They couldn't communicate with the alien species, which made it more difficult. The time travel device was about 10 feet tall and could fit a truck in it. It looked like a portal of some sort and was circular. Dr. William proceeded to launch the device with the help of the captured alien, as a massive energy pulsated around it. Certain connections were made and he was set to go in. He had studied the laws which governed time travel, and he knew what to do. The other scientists stepped back, but Dr. William remained in front of the device, laughing aloud with pride. I hold the power of time in my hands. I am the new god. I am what the world needs, he screamed at the top of his voice as he charged towards the portal, which had now formed a deep, dark haze. His fellow scientists had warned him that they needed more time to study the device to ascertain its safety before use, but Dr. William had waited too long, and his curiosity was at its peak. Everyone was terrified of the device. Despite years of research, They still had little knowledge about it, and the vast possibilities of what could be achieved with the device seemed to scare them now. But Dr. William had exhausted every ounce of patience and wanted to know desperately. Clark suddenly lunged from a hidden corner in the lab and tackled Dr. William to the floor, just before he jumped into the dark hollow of the device. Dr. William was old, and he was no match for Clark's well-built arms. The rest of our team trooped in quickly through different access points. We had infiltrated the entire place, and Dr. William was left defenseless. Everyone at CERN seemed to have changed their minds anyway. The alien suddenly broke free, but did not attack anyone. It remained still, watching everyone's movements for a few moments. Bell instructed everyone to stand down. It then motioned towards me. It was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. But Bell could. She lunged towards the device control and punched a few buttons. The alien then suddenly jumped in front of the time machine and held both of them together.
No, 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 you son of a bitch, get off me!
Dr. Williams seemed to know what he was attempting to do, and if he was angered by it, then it was definitely a good sign for us. Wait a minute, they weren't here to retrieve the time travel device. They were here to destroy it, but it seemed as though the device can only be destroyed when the two of them are bonded together. The revelation hit me as I stared in shock. That was what the alien was doing. Bell motioned for everyone to step out of the room. No one protested, and everyone immediately rushed out. Dr. William was cuffed and carried away as he continued to scream. An explosion soon erupted from within the lab, throwing everyone to the ground. No one was hurt. After a while, the alien emerged from within the thick smoke and proceeded towards a laptop that sat on a desk somewhere in a corner. It typed on the computer before dropping something on the table and launching out of the room through the window, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. I rushed towards the laptop and stared at a sticky substance which it had left behind before shifting my gaze towards the text on the screen. I was amazed. It looked to be an archaic language. I turned on the translator. 6 words now appeared recognizable. Destroyed device. Cure left. Going home. I understood what it meant instantly as I shifted my gaze back to the substance on the table. A cure for the pandemic. It had destroyed the device and it was returning home. It had completed its mission. It was probably going to tell the rest of its kind that the mission was complete. Hopefully, they would return peacefully to their world. Our world may never know what happened this day, but a few of us will carry this memory and look out to an adventurous future because we knew that there was a thriving civilization lurking somewhere beyond our galaxy. I shifted my gaze towards the sky. Somehow, we believed that only humans were capable of good, but this alien had just proved us wrong. Not all of its kind were good, but unlike the ones we had met on the spaceship a few days ago, it chose peace.